Once upon a time, I was a Vita hater. Hello everyone and welcome to the RF Generation PlayCast. I'm GreyGhost81 and this is episode 20, covering our selections for November 2015. For the retro title, Rich, Steven, and Floyd tackle a hidden gem action RPG for the Super NES known as Secret of Evermore. Over on the modern side, Steven and I believe we can fly in our chat about the crown jewel of the PlayStation Vita's library. It's Gravity Rush. As usual, all plot and gameplay spoilers are open for discussion in both segments. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @RFGPlaycast. You can listen to the show on Podbean and iTunes. Most importantly, don't forget to log on to rfgeneration.com to join our playthroughs and discuss the incredible games we play together. Thank you as always for listening, and now, on with the PlayCast.
Hello and welcome to the November RF Gen Retro Playcast for 2015. I'm your host, Single Banana, or Rich, and joining me are my two co-hosts, Floyd.
Hey everybody, happy to be here.
And Steven.
Hey guys, how's it going?
All right, thanks for joining us, guys. I really appreciate it. Played a pretty cool game this month in Secret of Evermore. I'll start it off. It was my month to host the game, so just go ahead and start and talk a little bit about the history of the game. This one was released in October 1st of 1995. It was actually the first game developed by Square in the United States, and actually in North America for that matter. It was also released on PAL in February of 1996, but was actually a game that was never released in Japan. Not exactly sure why it was never released in Japan. Did you guys see anything about that, or know kind of why it maybe wasn't released?
No, I actually didn't know that until very recently, that it never came out in Japan, but I don't know, maybe the game was just too American. I don't know. That was kind of the point of Secret of Evermore, I think. But
right,
that would make sense. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
Yeah,
because it's the only game made by Square's American branch, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It was made in Seattle. It was made in Seattle, and it was kind of their, I guess, sort of their jump into the American market. You know, sort of localizing. There was still a lot of heavy control, from what I understand, from Japan. For this game, but as many of you know, and I know Steven's going to talk about this later, the game Secret of Mana came out before this game, and so there's often draws a lot of comparison between the two games, and for good reason, which we'll get into. But I think there was a lot of sort of mixed reviews because there were so many comparisons between the two, and maybe the reason that they never decided to release it officially in Japan. So now it's pretty nice that we have a game that people from Japan actually want to import, right?
That's right. we've got this, and they've got Secret of Mana too.
That's true. So just to get in a little more in the history, the original title of this game was Vex and the Mesmers.
Wow.
I know. Sounds like a bad band
That's
name.
a really
like
bad hair metal band name.
Like one of Uncle Jesse's bands from Full House or something. It sounds like to me. Vex and the
totally.
Mesmers. What was it, Jesse and the Waves or something like that?
The Rippers.
The Rippers. You're right, the Rippers. So this game was produced by Alan Weiss, and he originally had this concept of a group of magic users who could tell dream stories and transport listeners into the experience virtually. And then during one of the storytelling sessions, Vex gets trapped in one of these worlds and starts to corrupt the dreams, and the game was going to be about finding Vex and defeating him. So that was the original concept of the game, but it was scrapped for actually the version that we have now and what we played, and we'll talk a little bit about that story. But before we get into talking about the story, I just want to talk sort of about our personal histories with this game. Have either of you guys played this game before?
I haven't. This was my first time playing it, and I was excited to play because it's something that I've wanted to finally sit down and knock out for a while, and finally got to do it now.
Absolutely. How about you, Steven?
Yeah, I remember renting this game once when I was a kid, because I actually owned Secret of Mana when I was a kid, and I played through that game a lot. It was, it's a very nostalgic and a childhood favorite of mine. And so, of course, I rented Secret of Evermore, and I didn't really get into it. Something about just the opening sections that seemed kind of unappealing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always one I wanted to come back to and give it another shot, because I've heard a lot of good things about it. So I was glad to finally have a chance to do that with our community playthrough.
Right, absolutely. Just thinking about what I was doing in 1995, in October of 1995, I was my first year at college, so I was gaming at that point. Of course, everyone games in college, but I do remember this game coming out. I think one of the coolest things about the game is the artwork, the cover artwork. It's so bold. It's so just really cool. You're fighting that giant bug, and I think just almost the cover of the game sells it. It looks action packed, right? It looks like a cool game to play. But I think at that time I wasn't really into RPGs. I think I didn't get into RPGs probably till my sophomore or junior year. So this sort of passed by for me. This and actually Secret of Mana. So I haven't played either of the games. So this is sort of my the first time I've dipped my toe into this series. So which I shouldn't call it a series, because the games aren't related story wise, right? But they are very similar in ways. And Steven, since you've played it, I know we'll be getting into that quite a bit. So, do one of you want to tell us a little bit about the story and kind of what happens in the game?
Sure. So, story starts out with the main character, who's a boy. He's leaving a movie theater with his dog, and they live in this fictional town called Podunk. And his dog starts chasing after this cat, and they end up in this sort of like this abandoned lab area, I think.
Mm-hmm. Like a mansion or something, the lab. Right?
Yeah, it's like this mansion, and there's like a laboratory at the top, I believe. And I think the dog starts chewing on some wires, and they end up getting transported to this land of Evermore.
Mm-hmm.
And you find out that Evermore is kind of divided up into 4 different regions. Each one is created from the minds of the 4 people who were transported to Evermore from Podunk like 30 years earlier in an experiment gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess the story is just you're going through these areas trying to find a way to get back to your hometown.
Right. Yep. It's got a very Back to the Future feel to it, almost, right? You're kind of going back. You're not really going back in time, but you are sort of doing this sort of time travel sequence, or at least it feels like time traveling. It's like you said, this whole idea that these places are basically created through the imagination of the 4 people from Podunk who were sent there 30 years ago.
And each of these 4 different places are like representative of a different time period.
Sure. Some of them a little bit mixed up. I think the second area, I think Antiqua is sort of a mishmash of like Egyptian, ancient Rome, and I don't know. I mean, there's pirates that show up, so it's kind of a bizarre area, right?
Yeah, I thought it was odd that in that area there was a desert right next to the coast.
Sure.
So
why not, right?
Sort of like these worlds are based off these people's interests,
right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I guess so. Just out of curiosity, as you mentioned before, you play as a boy and a dog, and of course you get to name your character. There's not is there a default name for these characters? Do you know?
Not that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that there is no default name.
Mm-hmm. What did you guys end up naming your character and your dog, if you don't mind me asking? And if you do mind me asking, tell me anyway.
When I was a kid, I was actually a big fan of the wrestler Sting.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with the singer.
Right.
So around that time, I started naming a lot of my characters in games Sting, and that's just something in RPGs I've continued to do. So my character's name was Sting.
Did you name your dog Gold Dust?
Oh, that would have been cool.
No, I actually named the dog. At the beginning of the game, he says something to the dog like, "Where are you going, buddy?" or something like that. So I thought the dog's name was Buddy.
Okay.
So that's actually what I ended up naming him.
Okay, Sting and Buddy. All right.
Yeah.
How about you, Floyd?
I went with Fleech for the boy, and
Sure.
I know that's not very creative.
I went with Banana, so I think it's very creative.
Oh, okay, cool. And then I called the dog Buster.
Buster. Okay, cool. Did you have a dog or anything growing up named Buster? Or?
No, I just think it's a good name for a dog.
Sure, why not? Picking up a dog tomorrow for my kids for Christmas, so just been struggling with names, and I think I struggle with this name as much as I'm struggling with the one I'm going to be picking up. But
well, that's one of the things that like I'm so conflicted about in RPGs. Is I find it so hard to name characters.
Right. It's kind of nice when they do have a default. I mean, I can always name the main character, because I always like to use Banana because we do these playthroughs, and so like I'll often like take snapshots and stuff, so it's sort of like my proof that I actually played through the game, because who in their right mind is going to call their character Banana, So that's kind of one of the reasons I do that. But I ended up naming my dog Rolf. Was big fan of the Muppets growing up, the variety show in the 70s.
Oh.
So the dog that plays the piano, his name's Rolf. So that's what I went with. So well, anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about the combat. Now this is an RPG, but it's a very it's not a turn-based RPG. It's just one where you're it's very action oriented, so you're doing a lot of moving around, you're hitting things, and of course, as in any RPG, the enemies have hit points and things of that nature. But really, the combat is fairly fluid, and just wanted to kind of talk about the different types of combat in the game and such, and how you guys felt about the combat.
Well, for physical combat, there's like knockback when you get hit or if you hit an enemy.
Yeah.
And that works really well because you have after you do a move, you have to let a meter refill before you can attack again. Otherwise, you're not attacking at full strength.
Right.
So
and a lot of times you'll just miss.
Or you'll just miss, yeah.
Right.
So I think the knockback combined with the timer thing is a cool mechanic.
Yeah, I not to get started too early with the Secret of Mana comparisons, but just to kind of refresh my memory, I actually popped the cartridge in yesterday to kind of just to compare the gameplay a little bit.
Right.
And when you mentioned the like the strength meter, it actually refills a lot faster in Secret of Mana.
Oh, does it?
Was,
yeah.
Interesting. So there's not as much. You don't have to wait as long for like the percentage to increase. Which I guess it's good because Secret of Mana doesn't have that knockback, so it kind of it's like a different approach, really. It's almost like the combat's slightly more slow paced.
Right.
Mm.
Well, Mana
in
for
Secret
me,
of
I've
Mana.
always thought of it as like Zelda meets an RPG kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's a very good way to put it. And Evermore it's almost exactly the same.
Mhm.
And how it's just very slight variances, but
Right.
Yeah, it's just a little bit slower.
Yeah, I
yeah,
I did find that the strength bar was a bit annoying in
Mhm.
the game. I can appreciate, okay, if you're attacking too quickly, maybe your attacks aren't going to do as much damage. But I did think that waiting for that to charge up was a bit aggravating, and especially when you have like later in the game. Well, in the game, I should mention you have weapons in the game. You start out with a bone, which is sort of like it turns into like a sword. That's sort of your melee weapon, and then you get an axe, and then you get a spear, which are your three basic types of weapons in the game. You get like a bazooka later, but that's completely you don't really play with that through much of the game. And with the spear, that you can actually charge that up if you hold it down. If you level up your spears, you can charge that up. And I just thought that like doing that, though it takes off more damage, it takes forever to charge up those weapons and that strength bar. It's kind of I don't know.
So you didn't think it was
and
worth?
again,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say when I was comparing the two games, Secret of Mana and Secret of Evermore, I noticed that it charges a lot faster too. Like when you're charging your weapons up, so that kind of ties into it being a little more fast paced, I think, than Secret of Evermore. But yeah, you typically want to charge your weapons because it does so much more damage. But there's a trade off there because it takes a lot more time, and you almost have to ask yourself, would you be doing more damage if you just let it get to 100% and just attack normally and be able to attack more times than you would by charging it to like level 2 or whatever it was. I think 2 was the highest, but
What's that? Charging what to level 2?
Charging up a weapon.
the weapon.
Each weapon goes up to level 3 actually.
Well, the weapon does, but I think it only charges twice. Isn't that right? Like the bar will only charge like the little bar only goes up 2 times.
You've got your energy bar that goes to 100. And then the
Right,
bar goes
yeah.
all the way up, and then it goes all the way up again at level 3.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
Yeah,
what you're
that's-
saying.
okay.
Okay. Sorry, I was counting that first one as a third time. So, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I did find some of the melee combat in the game a little frustrating at times. Hit detection and hitbox is a little. It felt a little off when I started playing the game. Once I got used to it, it was much better. But it was a lot of times it was sort of hard to get the correct angle on an enemy, and would find
Yeah.
myself missing a lot of times.
There were certain enemies that I had a really hard time hitting,
Sure.
like those like flying enemies
Mhm.
in particular.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
there's like in the pyramids there are those like flying, almost like skeletal birds or something,
Mhm.
but they were like impossible for me to hit. I just ran past like all of them.
I
Yeah, just use
always
magic.
have a hard time with flying enemies. So
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things too. I mean, you could charge up a weapon like a spear and throw it, but there's another type of risk or reward in throwing that spear, especially at flying enemies. And a lot of the enemies in the game were very dodgy
Mhm.
and sort of quick, and so you would often just miss. You try to throw it, or you'd have to wait for the sort of the right moment to throw it, and it was hard to judge. I mean, with some enemies like raptors and things like that, you could figure out what their pattern was and be able to hit them. But I did find it frustrating when you would charge up so much and then just completely whiff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there were 2 types of combat that you could use in the game. One was, like we mentioned, like the weapons system, and then the other was alchemy, which is basically like magic, in a lot of games. But with this game, the concept of alchemy, you're finding ingredients. You can buy ingredients, or you can just find them like throughout every level. And you just use those. You get these alchemy spells from different people, from books, and from bookcases and scrolls and things like that you might find. And, if you could combine these ingredients, you could, use these different types of spells to attack. So, I know, Stephen, you mentioned that you didn't use a whole lot of alchemy in the game, right?
Yeah, I think when I was at the second boss fight, the snake thing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I went. He's hard to hit because he's sort of like at a range from you. You can't really just walk up to him and hit him. So I went to use a magic attack, like I think it was like the fireball or something. This is very early in the game, so you don't have a lot to choose from.
Right.
And it did like 8 damage or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, I'm not using magic anymore. So fortunately, I had the spear leveled up enough that I could throw it.
Uh-huh.
So I just used that.
Okay.
But, yeah, that kind of set the tone for me for most of the game because I just kind of swore off magic at that point.
Yeah, it's one thing we should mention about this game is like not only can you level your weapons, I think each weapon has a max level of 3, but a big part of this game is being able to sort of level up your magic. That also levels as your character levels. So you're actually leveling 3 things, right? Your characters, your dog, you and your dog, your weapons, and then your magic. So that's a big part of the game. And the more you level up the magic, the more powerful it becomes, and ultimately, it seems like we played the game a lot differently. I used a lot of magic, and magic becomes completely overpowered in the game, to where you don't even have to use a lot of attacks.
Yeah, and you really have to invest in magic to level it up, and it can be costly because of the ingredients that it requires, but there are actually enemies late in the game that really do require magic, so I kind of had to take some time to level up a certain spell just so I could kind of, get some damage in on those enemies.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is you can level stuff up even with like lower level characters. There are places in the game that you can definitely do a lot of magic grinding. One of those is just east of the prehistoric village. All those like kind of like turtle kind of, I don't know what they are, like turtle ostrich
I
kind
spent
of
some time there, like powering up my weapons and just getting experience
Right.
just for general levels.
Yeah, and you can actually come back there late in the game. You get some alchemy like sort of late in the game that you can kind of come back to that spot and work on leveling that up if you choose to. I mean, it's not, like you said, it's not necessary, but you can do that in the game, which is kind of nice. Floyd, how did you feel about the alchemy system?
Well, did we mention that your alchemy levels up based on how much you use it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I must have zoned out for that part. I was kind of like Steven about the magic. I wasn't a big fan of it because I'm a big time item hoarder with these RPG games. So, because I didn't like that you had to, use your ingredients to use those alchemy spells. So I was always concerned about running out. So I relied on like physical attacks mostly and magic only when it was needed.
Yeah. And we should also mention that, in order to use alchemy, you couldn't map up to any buttons or anything like that. You actually had to go into your menu and pull up your menu before each cast, which, to me was, I don't know, it wasn't playing like a Final Fantasy game where you can just kind of select, that's turn-based and you can just sort of select something. And when something's turn-based anyway, it's like the action is kind of stopped anyway until you make it happen, right? But with this, it seemed to break up a lot of the fluidity in the game.
I agree with that.
If that makes sense. Like having to stop and cast. I mean, the good thing is when you brought up if you were casting the same spell over and over, if you brought up the menu, it would automatically be right there where you could just kind of plug it in and use it. But, to me, it's sort of, and I don't know what better way they could have done it for this type of game, being sort of an action RPG. But it sort of, like I said, it kind of broke it up for me,
Yeah, because it is like real-time combat, right? So
right,
and you have to pause everything to pull up a menu to cast a spell. Like I can't remember were the R and L buttons used for anything?
I don't recall.
'Cause
I don't
I mean,
remember the
Not,
shoulder
not
buttons.
actually. The only command I think those served were to make the dog sniff.
That's it. You're
Oh,
right.
Which
right,
doesn't
right,
really,
right, right. Yeah,
which isn't really
yeah. I
helpful
didn't
at
really
all.
do that.
No.
That's why I forgot.
No.
Because then that would have been
Yeah.
perfect for like mapping spells.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been a great idea.
Mhm.
Yeah. But you're right.
Uh,
And kind of speaking about that, I'm sorry, Steve, were you going to say something?
Well, I was gonna mention, you talked about this is an action RPG with like some menu mechanics, and Kingdom Hearts is the same way, actually. But I guess Kingdom Hearts, you move the character with the analog stick, and you can kind of navigate the menu in real time with the D-pad.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how they handled it.
Oh, I see.
That's so
you
funny.
couldn't do that in this game, of course.
So funny
but,
that you bring that up because I made that comparison in my mind this afternoon. Like these two games are, I mean, they're not similar, but like they're both sort of like on the weird, unexpected side of like the Square RPGs.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of a strange concept that they're like action RPGs with like these very turn-based RPG mechanics and with these menu systems. That's how you use magic and items and any kind of skills. Is you have to navigate a menu. And in Kingdom Hearts' case, it's while in real time while the action's actually going on. And in the case of Secret of Evermore, the game actually pauses so you can navigate the menus. But yeah, they are very similar in that way.
Yeah. What did you guys think of the like ring menu system?
Took a little getting used to for me. It's not something that I was familiar with. I'm sure Steven had an easier time with it,
Yeah.
I did not like it at first. Once I figured out how everything or what everything was attached to, like what would control or how I would get to my weapon choices, how I would get to equipping things, how I would set my level of aggressiveness versus searching. Once I learned how to do that, I was fine, and it seemed like it was very second nature. I will say this, and one of the things that I had to sort of look up for the game was I had to look up how to heal, and the reason is because I have this game loose. I don't have a booklet, so I didn't know that like petals were the healing item. Right? I mean, I thought that was probably just another ingredient for alchemy. I had no idea. So I had to figure out how to get to petals, what they did, and how that would work. That was a little aggravating. And I noticed online a lot of people are like, "How do I heal in this game?" They couldn't even like figure that out.
Yeah, that's something you really need the manual for. Because I wondered the same thing, and I went online, and everybody seems to have that problem of not knowing how to heal when they start this game.
Right, and it just has to do with the menu system and knowing how to manipulate and go through the menu system. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny, but like I said, I played Secret of Mana like extensively when I was a kid, and the menu system is exactly the same. There's no deviation at all. But I still, when I played Secret of Evermore, I was still like, how do I heal? Just like I don't know why I didn't make the connection. Like that I had to like cycle through the various rings. Like there was actually more than one.
Right. You just did that usually by pushing up on the D-pad. Is that right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a different type of system, like you said, but I think it works for the game. I think it's not overly convoluted, but it can be a little daunting to a new player and someone who's never played these games before, for sure, right?
Yeah, it's just something you have to get used to.
So one of the things I mentioned about the menu system is there's this option, and I don't know if you guys use this a lot, but the whole like aggressiveness sort of search option, which you could change. You could actually change for your character. You could change how strong your attacks were versus how much defense that you would be able to use. And then with your dog, you would change how aggressive the dog would be in fighting as opposed to how much the dog instead would search for alchemy items, right? Did you guys use this system a whole lot? Did you do a lot of changing throughout the game, or?
Not really. I think maybe halfway through the game, I set the dog like all the way to the max aggressive level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just left it like that. And then, honestly, I didn't really notice much of a difference. I think there was one point where I set it all the way down to search because I was trying to level up my weapons or something, and the dog kept killing the enemies. So I set it all the way down to search, and I don't think he didn't attack at all.
Right, he won't attack at all if you go all the way down.
Yeah, that's the only time I noticed an actual difference. I didn't really notice a difference between like that neutral point and max aggressiveness.
Right. Yeah, that was sort of what I did. I mean, I just, I made sure that, like, when I was trying to level up my weapon, like you said, I would put it all the way down. But when I was in a boss encounter or something like that, I would just crank it all the way up. Because the dog, I mean, wow. The dog is super overpowered in this game.
Yeah.
What a great companion.
Yeah, you have to manually set him to use like his charge attacks. But once you do that, and he starts, he'll charge in between attacks, and he was just doing way more damage than I was. He was doing like 2 or 3 times the amount of damage that I was able to do.
Oh wow. Yeah. I mean, I think my dog at one point was definitely hitting for over 1,000 damage, like toward the end of the game. It was unbelievable. But and one thing we should mention while we're talking about the dog, one of the kind of the neat things about the game is as you're moving from place to place, your different area, your dog changes, right? It starts out when you're in Podunk, your dog's sort of like a little terrier, and then when you go to Prehistoria, it's like a wolf dog or something like that. And then Antiquia, it turns into, isn't that when it's the Greyhound? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then in Gothica, it's a poodle.
That was pretty fun. He must have done something bad to come back as a poodle.
Hey now, poodles were actually during that time period they were hunting dogs. They were bred as hunting dogs.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, they were pretty great animals during that time. So pretty vicious.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final area, which is the futuristic level, your dog is sort of like a flying toaster. It shoots lasers, which is pretty awesome. And I think for a lot of people, that's probably their favorite morph of the dog in the game. But I found it kind of funny that the dog would morph for every level, but you would sort of stay the same. I don't know. It's kind of odd.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I didn't really think about it much, but yeah, it doesn't really make much sense.
Yeah. I wasn't. It wasn't so bad that you wouldn't morph in the game, but I think one of the things that disappointed me in the game, and maybe it's just they ran out of space and ability to do this, but I was sort of disappointed that, like, when you would put on new armor, that your clothes or anything like that wouldn't change. It always stayed the same. You got your orange Michael J. Fox vest on, and your jeans, and you sort of keep that on the whole time, no matter what, no matter what type of armor you've selected.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would have been cool, but I mean, I guess that's kind of typical of games from this era.
Sure.
I mean, I can't think of many 16-bit RPGs where the sprites change based on the armor they're wearing, but yeah, that definitely would have been cool if the game had done that.
Yeah. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the items in the game. Were there any that you used quite a lot? I mean, I'm sure, at the beginning of the game, you're using petals and things like that to heal, and then there was the dog biscuit, right? But once you sort of started getting healing spells in the game, it seemed like it was a better thing to do just to use your alchemy to heal, because it would just keep leveling up your spell, right? And it would make your heals, that much stronger. But were there any other items in the game that you guys used quite a bit of, or anything?
There was one item that I used towards the end called pixie dust.
Okay.
Which, if you use it, it makes it so that if you lose all your health, you won't die. It'll give you I think it's like 150 health back or something.
Oh wow!
So Yeah, just sort of like a little safety net to keep you from dying. So I use that for some of the tougher bosses at the end.
See, I didn't even know about that. I knew that there was like, I knew that, that was something you could buy in the game, and there something else, or something called like Essence or something like that.
Yeah, I think that was something that cures like status effects.
Okay.
Maybe I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know there was an item that does that. So.
Right. Well, I mean, yet again, I mean, you can just use alchemy for that. I
Yeah.
don't know, to me, and I don't know how you guys felt, but I almost felt like a lot of the items in this game were sort of throwaway. I just didn't feel like, I mean, they were in every town. You could purchase them. I never purchased a single item. I mean, I did purchase a lot of alchemy ingredients because, like I said, I did a lot of alchemy in the game. I used that to my advantage quite a lot and kept that powered up. But the other items, I don't know. They almost seem like useless in a way.
Yeah, I guess this is kind of just going back to like our different play styles with this game, and I didn't use alchemy much at all.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I think that's important to note is that you don't have access to all your different alchemy spells. You can only, I think it was like 10 that you can actually have equipped at a time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I think I usually didn't keep those type of spells equipped, like the things for like resurrecting your dog and the spell that would do the same thing as the pixie dust.
Sure.
And like I did use heal a lot. I actually got heal leveled up a few levels, but it wasn't like super high leveled, so it wasn't. It would do decent healing, but it wasn't like healing me like all my health.
Right.
So like if I got like if I had not like really low health, I would use one of the good healing items.
Mm-hmm.
So I always stay stocked up on those type of items just to just in case I needed them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something else in the game, and I guess it's sort of considered an item, but something else you could find in the game were these things called call beads. And the way that you get a call bead in the game is when you beat a board, like say the first board, the girl from Podunk is named Fire Eyes, and isn't she the granddaughter of the professor who had the lab? I think that's right.
Maybe she might have been the niece.
Might have been the niece,
but it may have been the granddaughter.
Okay. Yeah, I can't remember
sure
exactly what her relationship was. I know she was related to him in some way.
Yeah.
But when you finish, when you beat Magmar, which is the kind of the final boss for that level in the volcano, you get this thing called a call bead. And she's like, okay, well, you use this, and you can sort of call on me, and then you can use that call bead to do some sort of magic. I think each of the 4 characters had maybe 4 different spells each, for total around 16 or so, and that would they could work in different ways as far as healing, powering up your character in various ways, curing stats and things of that nature. Were the call beads, was that something you guys used a lot or kind of took advantage of?
I didn't use them at all until I got to a particular boss fight, which was one of those fights that required you to use alchemy.
Uh-huh.
I had like 20 of them saved up at this point,
Okay.
so I just... And that boss fight was like impossible for me trying to fight with melee, so I used all my call beats on that one fight, and I think I found a few more later on in the game, but I don't think I made use of those. So I think I pretty much just used them exclusively for that one fight.
Yeah, which fight was that?
That's the rat thing.
The Verminator. Oh yeah.
He's like up on those crates.
Yeah.
So you can't touch him.
Yeah.
So you have to use your spells.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think that's probably one of the more aggravating fights in the game for a lot of people, from what I've seen online.
That's the first boss fight I really had any trouble with.
Oh yeah.
So I had a little bit of trouble with the first boss fight, but didn't take much for me to come back and overcome that one. But
yeah,
that one, the Verminator, actually took me a few tries.
Yeah, I kind of wiped that guy out pretty quick. I mean, like I said, and it's our different play styles and how we played through this game, which is kind of interesting to talk about and really neat. But for me, it was more, I was using so much alchemy that when I got to that point, my alchemy was so powered up. Especially, I was using Crush quite a lot, and I was able to take that guy out in pretty much no time. It was so high leveled. And you're right about that fight. That's one of the things that it kind of stinks about that fight is that your dog can't even attack during that fight. You have to kind of do that one on your own. And so you have to either hope that your alchemy is really highly powered up, or you've got a spear that you're able to throw, right?
Yeah, but I had a spear and I could throw it, and it did a lot of damage. But the problem was he would cast spells too often, so I'd have to keep healing myself.
Yeah.
And the spells he used really hurt because they would. I couldn't take more than 2, and he would cast them pretty quickly. So I really didn't have enough time to really charge the spear up.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about money in the game. As you know, as you go from place to place, I think what the money in the first level is like talons. At one point, it's gold coins. At one point, it's credits, and I can't remember what the other one was.
It was jewels or
gems or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, and so when you would go to different areas, one of the things you would have to do before you could buy something is you would have to exchange, and the exchange rates were not always in your favor. So it can be a little difficult sometimes, a little aggravating.
I think it was for every 2 talons you would get 1 gem,
right?
Something like that.
Right.
So all of a sudden your money was just cut in half.
Right, exactly. And I think it might have been the same when you went to the next level for your gems would be every 2 gems for every gold coin or something, something like that too. So.
Which might have been an attempt to try to keep your money from getting from keeping you from having too much money. I know you and I both said that we both never had any trouble with money in this game. We always had more than enough.
Yeah, I never had a problem with that. I mean,
and that's even after these exchange rates. So
yeah, and one thing you learn in the game is sometimes you'll dispatch an enemy and you'll pick up it'll leave something behind. You can pick up talons or something like that. Mm-hmm. But one thing the game doesn't really tell you is every time you dispatch or kill an enemy, you actually get money each time. You get experience in money. Yeah. And you're never told what that amount is or anything. But if you need to buy some armor to get to another level or upgrade, all you get to do is grind for a little while. And I never felt like one of the cool things about this game, I never felt like I had to grind a whole lot. I mean, I did some in the beginning just to kind of get some better armor, get leveled up a little more, because I'll be honest, that the first fight with Thrax, the big bug, that sort of wiped me out a few times, and so I had to go back and get some better armor, grind just a little bit, but I kind of felt like with the remainder of the game, as long as I was just as I was moving through the screens and stuff, as long as I was taking out enemies as I was going along and not trying to avoid them, I felt like I leveled up really well and didn't have to do any grinding for the rest of the game.
Yeah, that was my exact same experience also, and I felt like I didn't actually want to run past the enemies. I actually wanted to kill them along the way because this is kind of a fast-paced action RPG. The combat is fun, so it doesn't feel like grinding when you have to kill a bunch of enemies for something. I know in a lot of turn-based RPGs with random encounters, you might often find yourself trying to run from those battles because it just gets very tedious after a while.
Yeah.
I feel like this game doesn't really have that problem.
No, I didn't think so. I thought the game was pretty fluid in that sense, and that you didn't have to do a whole lot of grinding. I mean, I don't mind grinding. I mean, I'm the king. I mean, the first RPG I played was Dragon Warrior. You want to talk about grinding? I mean, that is a grind fest, and I loved it. I mean, as a kid, I thought it was the best thing ever. But yeah, I mean, this game was very. It didn't seem, some RPGs you can just skip things and you can still be leveled up enough, even if you skip things. But I felt that this game was very purposeful in the grinding, and that you can be underleveled if you don't. Clear the way, as you go, and then take out enemies as you go. So, in that sense, I thought it was very even kill and really fair. So I thought that was I thought that was pretty nice.
Yeah, I agree with that.
One of the things we didn't really talk about much with the story was that there's this sort of whole backdrop in the story with sort of like the dialogue in it, where there's this like sort of B-movie kind of tie-in into the game, which I thought was really cool. None of the movies are real movies, but the main character keeps referencing these movies throughout the game, and it's really neat. When I was in college, one of the things I really liked to do was this is going to date me. When I was in college, I would collect VHS tapes of like 1950s, like these old like sort of nuclear like monster films, around that time. And so I have a like a deep love for those type of atomic age type films, giant insects and things of that nature. So the dialogue in this game to me was really cool and a lot of fun. I don't know what you guys thought about the dialogue.
Yeah, I didn't really have much of too much to say about that. I mean, I know it's one of those things that's why a lot of people like this game, because it gives it a lot of personality and charm and humor.
Right.
Yeah, but he'll just kind of, after something happens, he'll say, "This is like what happened to this guy in this movie," or he'll say, "Just like this guy says from this movie," and say some random quote. But a lot of games, especially around this time, didn't do things like that. I think that's part of like how they tried to like Americanize this game or Westernize this game.
Sure, that's a good point.
Putting those type of things in there.
Yeah,
I think that sort of thing really resonated with a lot of people. That's why a lot of people really like this game.
Yeah, and whether you like the whole B-movie sort of references or not, I mean, you have to admit the game is pretty funny in places. I think you mentioned there was there's this like whole like you'd put this up on Twitter about the whole like sort of breaking of the fourth wall, that whole and I think it's in Antiquia, in that northern city. I can't remember, across the desert. There's a guy in the marketplace that's we're in a video. He's like, we're in a video game, and it's kind of funny. I mean, things like that kind of take you by surprise.
Yeah, he says something like, "We're just sprites at the mercy of our button pressing overlord," and then it says something. He actually gives you an option to like turn him into something. Mm-hmm. Like he's like, if I forget what he says, but he says something like, may the overlord strike me down or something, and the game actually gives you an option to like turn him into something.
Oh really?
Yeah, and if you choose not to, he'll give you, the character in the game that's you, he gives you like a better armor than what you currently have.
Huh.
Yeah,
I don't know if I flushed that out that much. I should have.
Yeah, you have to like keep talking to him like several times to get to that option. But
very cool. So, this game, I should mention, was planned to be around 12 megabytes, but it ended up being nearly 24. So, what they had originally planned for this game, was greatly exceeded. But one of the big things about this game, and I think it was Jerry Greenwood, one of our forum members at RF Generation, had mentioned that one of the things that we really on the forums got into that whole Secret of Mana, Secret of Evermore debate, like which is better. I mean that came out, of course. Having not played Secret of Mana, didn't have a lot to say about it, but I was trying to approach the game with an open mind. But one of the things that he mentioned was that Secret of Mana, was that a 4-player game? You could play up to 4 people at the same time. Is that right?
3 players.
3. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So and you needed a multi-tap, of course, which I'm sure not very many people had one of those.
Sure they did. I mean, you got to have it for your NBA Jam Tournament Edition, man. Come on. Doesn't everybody own one of those? They should if they don't.
I should get one. Yeah.
But But yeah, so this game was, this was sort of only a single player game, but you could switch between your guy and your dog if you wanted to. I know, like, to equip things, on your dog, like the different collars and stuff, you had to switch off, and you did that by, from what I remember, pressing the select button. Is that right? On the controller would switch you off
Yeah,
from one to the other. But I guess you could play as the dog and attack as the dog if you wanted to, but I don't know. I don't know many people that would have done that.
Did you do that much at all?
No. Did you?
No. Yeah.
Floyd,
No.
did you do any dog attacking?
No, never. Never.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I kind of felt like that was... I don't know why they put that in there. Now, there are some points in the game that we should mention that are sort of puzzly, where you have to play as the dog. There's the tunnels, and then there's the pyramid, like going inside the pyramid as the dog as well, and releasing the different door levers and things like that, where you have to switch a little back and forth.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool. I thought that was nice. I wish they would have done a little more with that in the sense of the puzzles. I didn't like the sort of sewer scene underneath the castle or whatever. I didn't really care for that a lot. I thought that felt a little bit tacked on. But I did like, the aspect of using the dog in conjunction with your main character to, like, solve puzzles and things like that. And I would have liked to see maybe a little more of that in the game, I thought, anyway.
Yeah, it was it's kind of surprising. It's very underutilized, but yeah, that could be a really cool gameplay mechanic, trying to switch off and solving puzzles, stepping on levers and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's only maybe a couple times in the game where you do that.
Yeah. That could just say more about me, though, and how I like to play games. I love puzzle games anyway, so maybe that's more me than other people. Maybe other gamers would find that possibly annoying, so
Maybe.
So I wanted to move on from gameplay and talk a little bit about the areas in the game. There were, of course, we've sort of mentioned these already. There was Prehistoria, which was sort of a prehistoric with dinosaurs area and swamps and things of that nature. Antiquia, which was, again, sort of a mishmash of pirates, Romans, and Egyptians, but sort of... I don't know, ancient history sort of area. And then we had Gothica, which was sort of it was more like a medieval type area, right?
Yeah, there were like castles and things.
Yeah. And then we had the last one was Omnitopia, which was the sort of futuristic space station sort of area. So just kind of curious what you guys thought about these areas in the game.
I guess Prehistoria, that was not... I'm actually trying to rank these in my head right now, but I'm trying to think if that's like second or third favorite. But I remember thinking it was kind of like an alright area. It wasn't really very annoying, but there was
I think you and I got into this, right? Because I was like, no, it's awesome because I love dinosaurs.
Yeah,
You're like,
I kind of
"That's not
mentioned
my
that I
favorite."
don't really even in like Chrono Trigger, which is my favorite game of all time, the prehistoric era in that game was probably like my least favorite part of the game.
Right.
Just because it's just not really a setting that appeals to me very much. So I kind of had I mentioned before that I played this game briefly as a kid, and like the early areas of the game kind of turned me off, and I think that's why the prehistoric era just not the most appealing to me.
Mm-hmm. I think I should mention too that we had talked about how they had planned for this to be 12 megabytes, and they had they kind of got over ambitious with it, but they were actually going to add a fifth area called Romancia. I guess it would have probably been before you went to Omnitopia in the future, which would have been, and this is what the developers said. They said, where everything is all flowers and sweet stuff, excessively so. It was pink and purple. I don't know how much of that I could have handled. I'm kind of glad they cut it out, and it would have made the game probably tremendously long. But at the same time, as far as the areas were concerned, I felt like the first three areas, Prehistoria, Antiquia, and Gothica, they were all different, but I felt like they all had sort of similar flow and felt good. I mean, you could go from one place to the other. You weren't super limited in where you could go, but the last area, Omnitopia, just felt like one big maze that you had to figure out, right? Very constrictive.
That last area was like a huge departure from the rest of the game, and that's I really hated that last area. Yeah, the space station.
Yeah. Tell us how you really feel.
But I think my favorite part of the game was Antiqua, the second area, because that's really where, like, during the first part of the game, I was kind of just like, yeah, this game's all right, you know. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. But when I got to Antiqua, I really started to enjoy it a lot more.
Right.
That's I would say that's definitely my favorite area in the game.
Yeah, I think there's things I liked about all areas. I don't think I could pick one that would be my favorite. I know which my least favorite is. That was the last area, and I think we kind of agree on that. But there's some good things and bad things about the areas. Like, for instance, Antiquia, the marketplace thing. I don't know. I mean, it was neat. It was a neat concept, but it was sort of like, you only have so much time to do this, so how could you play this game for the first time and be able to navigate that marketplace in enough time?
Yeah. Well,
this is a timed event.
It was timed, but I think after you do the Colosseum,
sure,
it's not timed after that.
Right. You can come back to it and do it later, but
but
you can really help yourself out and upgrade your armor.
Yeah,
quite a bit. If you're able to navigate that.
And I did that after the Colosseum, and I actually got kind of into it. I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And as I was mentioning, there's certain things about certain areas that I really like Gothica a lot, but I didn't like the sewer part, and I wasn't a big fan of the forest maze either. That was kind of an aggravating area.
Gothica was cool, because it was like, I like that kind of medieval setting, and it had like the castles and everything. I feel like a lot of the music was good in that area too.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, in my opinion, that area probably had the best music in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just an overabundance of the mazes, because you actually had two of those sewer areas.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One beneath each castle, and then there was the forest maze, which was awful.
Yeah.
There was that part where you control the dog, and you're going in those ducts, which was awful.
Right. Yeah, that was probably my least favorite part of the game. It was like controlling the dog and going through all the ducts and things like that. That was that was just, it wasn't that it was excessively difficult. I made it out of there without a walkthrough or anything, but it just, again, just something else that just sort of felt tacked on about the game. And there are a few parts of the game that, like I said, that feel a little tacked on, and that being one of them. The other that we shouldn't fail to mention, before you actually get to go to Omnitopia, after you finish Gothica and beat the boss in Gothica, you have to go on this fetch quest to sort of go get the parts to make the rocket. So I can't remember the scientist's name in Gothica, but he builds a rocket for you to shoot you up to up in outer space to land on Omnitopia.
Yeah, and I think this is really where the game started to go downhill for me. Where you got to this backtracking portion.
Yeah.
Because I think first, well, I guess there's not a set order, but I think first I went back to Prehistoria, I think, and you have to find 2 items there, which wasn't too bad, honestly. But then you have to go back to Antiqua and go into the pyramid to you have to fight this. There's a character named Tiny. There's like a pretty underwhelming quote unquote boss fight. 'Cause you don't even really fight him.
No, you just make it to where he's at.
Yeah, and he gives up.
Yeah.
But to get to that point, I backtracked all that way, went under the pyramid, and there's a boulder there where you have to the levitate
Yep,
spell.
and you don't have the levitate spell
So
equipped.
you haven't used a levitate spell since the beginning of the game, so you don't have it equipped, of course. So
Right.
I have to go all the way back out, equip it, go back down, find out I don't have the ingredients necessary to cast it.
Uh-huh.
So I had to go back out and find out where a mud pepper was. I had to go all the way back down there. So I mean, it was a pain.
Yeah, and then plus you have to trek across the desert again, or you have to have the Amulet of Annihilation to give it to the skeleton who rowboats you across the desert.
Yeah,
So,
I was sure to buy a couple of those.
absolutely, always keep plenty of those handy as you have to play through the game, which it's sort of a pain, and just again something else that it's neat. It is neat, but after you do that so many times, I think throughout the game you have to do it 5 or 6 times. It gets a little old.
And the first time I didn't have one, so I had to run across.
Yeah.
And it took a few minutes. I think, just
yeah.
to run across it.
Yeah,
so.
I think you have to. I don't think you have one of those until you get to the city.
There's this little secret guy that's in the town, the first town where you've washed ashore.
Uh-huh.
He'll sell you one for like 10,000 gems, but you don't have that much when
Sure.
you first get there. So
Absolutely. So
yeah.
Yeah, and he's pretty much probably used if you need one later and want to make it across later. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't mind the fetch quests so much. They weren't like excessively long. I thought they were kind of neat. But one of the things I didn't really like about it was that they just reused some of the enemies, and especially the boss.
Yeah.
The first boss, Thrax, who's the big bug. They basically just reskinned him from red to gray or silver, and just gave him a different name. I can't pronounce it. Colapetra or something like that. But I mean, it's just like, really? I mean, I'm having to fight the same. I mean, it was basically, other than this bug having a little bit stronger spells, it was basically the same fight.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that was probably probably the best and most like intricate boss fight in the game, in my opinion. I feel like, because that's like the first boss in the game, and then it's like this really cool. It's this giant like spider type thing, and he looks really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sprite is really cool looking, and the animations are good.
Yeah, it's cool enough to put on the cover of the game in the box.
Yeah,
right?
I thought that was surprising too.
I mean, that's the most iconic. That's the most iconic image in the game.
He's on the cover of the game, so I thought it'd be like the final boss or something, but it's the first boss in the game.
Yeah,
and every boss after that felt pretty underwhelming in comparison.
Yeah, I mean, it just they might have their little ins and outs, like Vigor, like the gladiator. I mean, you would have to hit him from the back. That was kind of a neat fight, but
yeah, that was kind of cool.
Yeah, but the other fights just seemed to be just there were no real patterns to figure out or anything like that. They were just kind of all straight up, just sort of heal and slash type battles.
Yeah, I know some,
or in my case, spam alchemy.
I mean, some, like at the start of the battle, the dog would just run in there and just decimate the enemy, and like, the battle was over in no time. That's how most of these fights worked out for me.
Yeah, a lot of them. Do you have any favorites or least favorite boss battles in the game?
Well, yeah, favorite was definitely Thrax.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and Vigor, the gladiator, was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at our list here.
I liked
the boss
Aquagoth.
fights.
I'll throw that one in. The octopus that was in the tunnel.
That was one of the more impressive ones.
Now that tunnel was annoying if we're talking about other annoying places in the game. But I did like that battle. With the tentacles. I thought that was a really cool scene. But the dragons were just kind of, I did like the Mongola fight too.
Yeah, the Mongola one was one of the better ones because you had to fight, those puppets. Right after I finished that battle, killed Mongola, I realized I gotten quite a bit of experience from the puppets. So I was thinking to myself, I should have just, grinded on these puppets for a while to get some levels. But...
It's a phrase I never want to hear again. I thought I should just grind on these puppets for a while.
Don't take it out of context. But Yeah, yeah, the dragons. I thought those were the sprites. I thought looked really bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
they're goofy.
because
They're really
yeah,
goofy.
they really were.
These like elongated kind of necks. It just really didn't, like you said. I mean, it just didn't really fit. I mean, you've got Thrax. It's really like menacing. I mean, you've got this giant bug with this rib cage that opens up with his heart, and these
Yeah.
awesome like long like arms. And then you start getting into some of these other enemies, and they're kind of goofy looking, and they just don't seem to fit with the game.
But yeah, I know. Like you hear in Gothica, the queen says something about he'll never make it past the dragon in the forest or something like that.
Right.
So I'm expecting this massive dragon. Like I'm imagining something like that dragon thing in Chrono Trigger in like the prehistoric area, on like the Tyranno lair.
Yeah.
And then you see that the one you actually get, and this is. Like you said, it's this goofy looking thing. I don't even. It just kind of floats around, and it looked really dumb.
yeah. And again, I mean that's a fight you have to do twice. I mean there's another dragon that's a different color, but it's again it's just a reskinned boss, which is a little unfortunate. I thought, sort of in my opinion. So
I thought the snake was kind of an interesting one too.
I like that one. I didn't like being limited by terrain and where you could go, but yeah, I thought that was a cool boss. I mean, when you've got those two bosses as your first two, you're sort of expecting big things throughout the game. But I did find, like you did, that a lot of them were somewhat disappointing, and not cool. I did like the snake. I like the sort of the mode 7 in the background where the snake was moving, like through the swamp. That was really cool. So I guess we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the final boss, or the quote unquote.
Oh, do we have to?
The quote unquote gauntlet of enemies, which was I don't know. I mean,
yeah, it kind of starts out with, I think, like there's a couple of raptors, a couple of spiders, just kind of regular enemies you've seen throughout the game. They kind of start coming at you, but they're like really powerful. They were really damaging me a lot, like almost killing me in one hit.
Yeah.
So you kind of go through those, and then you fight. I think you fight your clone. Again,
you do. There's a clone of you and your dog that you have to fight.
Yeah.
And then you fight again Magmar number 2. So there's a second Magmar that you have to battle, which is again just reusing a sprite, and I think it was gray instead of the fire color that it was the first time you fought it. And after you defeat him, I mean it's nonstop action, so it's a long battle. It actually I forgot about this. It starts out with this: you have to destroy these fans.
Yeah, it's like a wall of fans.
It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
But it culminates into this battle with Carlton's robot is the enemy, and it's
it's Carltron, not Carlton. It's not Carlton from Fresh Prince.
It's not okay. And the dude's not doing a little side dance,
There needs to be a ROM hack of this. Yeah.
That would be great. So yeah, which is it's the last battle. It's not. What's the best way to put it? I mean, it's not complex.
Good?
It's not good. It's a good way to put it. I mean,
I got really frustrated with that fight. I beat it on the first try, but I had quite a few close calls. Like I kept that pixie dust on, so it was like my safety net.
Yeah.
My dog pretty much just ran in there and got himself killed.
Oh yeah, you just gotta let the dog die in that fight. I mean, there's.
I kept trying to revive him with the biscuits, but he would just keep getting himself killed.
Yeah, he just runs into it. He's not gonna attack enough or make it close enough to attack. So.
But fortunately, I guess we didn't talk much about the bazooka.
Yep.
I had the bazooka on hand, and I don't know if you knew this, but there's actually a glitch with the bazooka, to where you essentially have infinite ammo with it.
No, had no idea.
Yeah, I think there's 3 ammo types for the bazooka, and I think 2 of them, the ammo's glitched, so it just never decreases.
Oh wow!
So and one of those is the strongest type, which is like the cryo blast or something.
Yeah, that's what I was using.
Yeah, the ammo just never decreases because it's glitched.
I had bought them all, but
Yeah.
just because I'm like, well, I've got all this money, I might as well,
Right. Yeah.
So I did, and then, yeah, I mean, the fight was, I mean, yeah, there's a pattern to the fight, but,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, dodge and then shoot really quick, after he fires. I mean, that's pretty much it. There wasn't anything deep or complex about the fight at all. I mean, it's just, you walk around, you dodge, and then you fire, when you have an opening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I pretty much just try to stay to the side of them.
Yeah.
And just hit them like on that horizontal plane.
Yeah, so very disappointing. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, or if you even did this battle. I think one of the more disappointing things in Omnitopia is that there aren't really any boss fights until you get to the end. But there is a hidden boss. Were you able to fight the hidden boss, or did you find the hidden boss?
I didn't fight it. I knew about it because I'd kind of been referencing a walkthrough on YouTube here and there when I got stuck. So I saw it, but I knew, from what I understand, the code, there's a little password you need, and it's random, I think.
It is.
So I didn't want to spend time trying to figure that out. And from what I could tell, I don't think you really got anything special for beating him.
You don't.
Yeah, so I didn't feel like bothering with it. At this point, I was pretty fed up with the game. I just was trying to get through it.
Yeah, that's how I was at the end. Yeah, I was just kind of dragging on at the end, and I hated that because I felt like the rest of the game was really nice. It was a really fun game. I mean, I've got my issues with the game. There's some things I didn't like I said, some of the rescanning and stuff, but overall, I mean, I feel like the reason they had to do a lot of the rescanning of some of the enemies is because they put so much effort into the graphics and the environments of this game.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the more beautiful games that I've ever played. I mean, the areas were really highly detailed and just really cool. And I know you had made a statement at the on the forums about, like, one of the things that you felt were different about this game, that the environments were very drab as far as compared to, like, Secret of Mana.
Yeah, and that was more, I was still in Prehistoria at this point, so, and everything in Prehistoria is kind of brown and, really a dark green color. It's just, I didn't find it very appealing to look at, and like of course, I'm always going to be comparing this game to Secret of Mana.
Sure.
And in comparison, Secret of Mana is just a very bright and colorful and vibrant game.
Mm-hmm.
But the later environments in Secret of Evermore, I thought looked much better.
Sure.
And it's not saying that Prehistoria looked bad. It looked good on a technical level. I just didn't quite like. I didn't like the artistic design of it.
Mm-hmm.
But everything is really, really detailed. Like, the environments look really good in this game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great detail.
Yeah. I kind of thought about what you said, and I came to this conclusion that a lot of the reason that the game is sort of drab as far as the color palette and things of that nature is that I mean, if you think about the prehistoric era, it would have been drab. I mean, there would have been no real bright colors. They didn't really have the ability to dye and do things of that nature. And as you progress through the game, the game gets a little brighter and brighter. And it kind of fits the, I guess, sort of assumed era that each of these worlds takes place in, if you will.
That's a good point. Maybe that's why I don't really like prehistoric environments, in general.
Lack of color.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, but yeah, I thought the graphics in this game, the sprite work, and I mean, everything was tremendous. I'm like you in the sense that I did think some of the bosses could have been done a little bit better. But overall, I mean, it's a really, really beautiful game. I was very impressed with it. And again, I haven't played Secret of Mana, so I don't know what it looks like, but from what I understand, it's a really beautiful game. And so at some point, I'm very excited to check that out at some point.
Yeah, I think Evermore looks better on a technical level, and it is much more detailed than Secret of Mana is. But I just kind of prefer the how vibrant
Sure.
Secret of Mana is.
Sure. One of the things that we would be remiss not to talk about would be the music and sound effects in this game. I want to mention that this game, oddly enough, being the first Square game published in North America, was scored by a kid who had just graduated from high school, or was about to graduate from high school. I mean, so odd that they would take a chance on someone like this to score the game. The guy's name was Jeremy Soule, and this was his first game that he had ever done. I mean, this is a big deal, Square's first North American release. But he, since then, he's done such games as Icewind Dale, Baldur's Gate, Dark Alliance, Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim, I mean, he's had an illustrious career. But the guy came straight out of high school, if you can imagine that. He sent in a demo tape. He was a big video game fan and had always loved, video game music, and, sent in a demo tape of some of his work, and they actually hired this kid to score this game. So, that's pretty impressive, for somebody with those types of credentials. But I will talk about the game. I know that a lot of people do have issue or take a lot of issue with the music and sound effects in the game. So I'll let you guys kind of take away on what you thought about the music.
When I kind of first started playing the game, I felt like I didn't like the music very much, and I think a lot of that's because, like, in Prehistoria, there's actually places where there aren't music. There's certain areas where they use, like, these ambient sound effects as sort of the soundtrack. And I really didn't like that. However, as you progress through the game, I feel like the music gets much better.
Sure. There's still those little patches, though. Like, the forest maze, you can only hear, like, sort of like birds chirping and sort of like the wind and stuff like that. It's very, very just ambient and very, very low key.
Which, from what I understand, that's really what they were going for with this game.
Yeah.
And I kind of had the opinion for a while that the soundtrack wasn't good in this game. But I think it was yesterday I went on YouTube and found a playlist of this game's soundtrack and listened through it. And the tracks are actually pretty good.
Oh, okay.
It's just that they're, like you said, they're more atmospheric and low-key, so they're not as memorable. And I think that's kind of why I felt like I didn't like this soundtrack at first, but the tracks themselves are pretty good.
Yeah, well, I could certainly understand that. I mean, it's very, as I said, very minimalistic. It does have some music in places, but for a lot of the places, you're just getting a lot of sort of environmental sounds and things like that, which is at the time this game was released, I mean, you're talking about, music for video games was, very top notch and something that people were really putting a lot of focus on in their games at the time. So it does feel, when you first play the game, it feels very out of place. But I actually really liked it. I mean, I feel like, this guy deserves a lot of kudos for, I guess, having the gumption to kind of to do it this way. How he saw this game, being sounded out, and I don't know, it works for me. Somehow it works for me. I really appreciate it and really like it. It's different, and I can really appreciate and get on board with it. I don't know, something about it I really liked.
Yeah, I know there's I think maybe one track that kind of stands out to me, and that's in Gothica, I think it's like Ivor Tower.
Okay, yep.
That sort of like town theme. And the thing about it is that track is, the way it sounded, it kind of gives you the impression that there's something kind of wrong with this town. Okay. That's at least the impression I got from listening to it. And it was very subtle, though. It was
a bit of foreshadowing, if you will.
Yeah, it was this kind of subtle track that it didn't sound ominous or like really ominous or anything, but it still just kind of had that little bit of uneasiness to it.
Yep.
And that really kind of stood out to me as, being able to capture that, the way Jeremy Soule did with this game. And, that was, for me, that was probably the standout track in my opinion.
Well, that's cool. And probably something that I should, I like what you did. Like, you went back and you actually pulled up the soundtrack and listened to it.
Mm-hmm.
I find when I'm playing games a lot of times, we'll get on these calls and everybody like, oh, well, I love the soundtrack. This is my favorite song. And this is, this was great. And, other than like Mega Man 2, which we talked about early in the year, who, know that soundtrack by heart, soundtracks just don't really stick out to me a lot of times. For this game, it did, because it was so different, I think. But I think, you did the right thing in going and like listening to that, and something I should probably be more aware of and do before we go on.
I'm really glad I did, because if I hadn't done that, I think I would have a pretty negative opinion of the soundtrack of this game right now.
Okay. Yep.
So it really kind of gave me a new perspective on it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's just wrap it up with some final thoughts here about the game. I know before this call and on the forums, I know Steven was like, it's going to be really hard for me not to talk about Secret of Mana.
I've had to bite my tongue a couple times.
And I understand.
I'm trying not to be obnoxious about it.
Yeah, and you want to give the game a fair shake, I mean, anytime...
Yeah, I want to be objective.
Yeah, anytime you play a game, whether it be a sequel, or a game that, let's say, one of your favorite game designers has done, you always want to kind of enter that with an open mind and not think about what they've done in the past. And it's hard to separate the two. It's nearly impossible, if not impossible, if you already have that on your mind. So now, Stephen, I'm going to give you your chance, since you're the only one out of the three of us who've played Secret of Mana, to just let us know, how you felt the games compared.
Well, I still have the opinion that Secret of Mana is the better game, and I'm sure some of that is, at least some of that is attributed to nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things I think each game does better than the other. Like I talked about the graphics. The graphics were technically superior to Secret of Mana. There was more detail in the environments. But I mentioned I kind of preferred the artistic direction that Secret of Mana has. But that's kind of a to each his own kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The sprite work, we talked about how some of the sprites in Secret of Evermore looked kind of bad, like the dragons and things. I mean, a lot of them were pretty good.
Right.
But like in general, but like the bosses in particular, some were pretty underwhelming. And it could be a nostalgia thing on this, but I feel like I really prefer the boss sprites and the bosses in general in Secret of Mana.
Mm-hmm.
Musically, we talked about how Secret of Evermore is more atmospheric, whereas Secret of Mana has more like memorable melodies. And I've always thought Secret of Mana has a pretty underrated soundtrack. I never really hear people mention that one, but I really enjoy it.
Mm.
And there's like particularly the boss music. But the boss music in Secret of Evermore was one of the tracks that I really didn't like. I didn't think it worked very well as this boss fight music.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the boss fight music in Secret of Mana. You should just Rich, sometime you should maybe go on YouTube and just listen to it, because I think it's this kind of frantic sounding, this epic, really cool track, and it's one of my favorite like boss themes in all of gaming.
Yeah, I hope that sometime that's a game that we could maybe convince enough people to play. We usually try to, a lot of people that listen to our PlayCast know that we usually try to keep the games under $40 just to make them affordable to max out participation. But I do hope that that's one game that maybe we can get enough people to hop on board and maybe play at some point. I think I know at least I would enjoy that, and you would probably enjoy returning back to it as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
one thing I found surprising was because the gameplay is so similar with these two games, they're almost identical. I always thought they used the same engine. Like with Secret of Evermore, they basically just took the engine of Secret of Mana
Right.
and maybe tweaked it a little bit. But I read somewhere that they actually built it from the ground up.
Hmm.
They didn't actually reuse it, but they just basically tried to make it exactly like Secret of Mana. So
That's odd.
yeah, so yeah, I'm not really sure what the purpose of that was, but that's. But I always felt like there were some minor differences with the gameplay, just these subtle variances. But yeah, and I guess that's why. So and I guess lastly, I will say Secret of Evermore. It's a much more atmospheric game,
Mhm.
and it has a lot more like personality and humor to it.
Right.
Secret of Mana feels much more traditional,
Mhm.
and I really think that's a big reason why people are drawn to Secret of Evermore is because of that sense of atmosphere
Sure.
and the humor, and it really feels unique
Mhm.
because of the the things like the B movie references and all those type of things.
And something
So,
you mentioned before, it feels more westernized as well.
yeah, exactly.
And then probably
Yeah.
why North
Yeah.
Americans probably really like the game, and could be some of the reason it wasn't released in Japan.
And your character looks like Michael J. Fox.
That's
So,
right. Well, and one of the things with this game, and one of my questions was, does Evermore get Secret of Evermore get a bad rap due to its namesake? I think it does a bit. I mean, you've got the Secret of Mana, you've got the Secret of Evermore, which follows it, so naturally people are going to think this is a sequel, which it's not. They had planned on possibly just naming the game Evermore and leaving it at that. And my thing is, do you guys think that if they had just left the name at Evermore, do you think it would have gotten such a harsh rap? Do you think that it would have drawn such strong comparisons to Secret of Mana?
I think it may have helped improve the game's reputation a little bit. But like I said, the gameplay is so similar.
Right.
I think people would have made the connection
Sure.
anyway. My opinion, my theory on why this game kind of has the biggest reason why the game kind of has the bad rap from back in the day is because a lot of people who had played Secret of Mana knew it was a multiplayer game.
Sure.
So, they saw Secret of Evermore. It's called Secret of Evermore, so it's similar namesake. The game looks similar. There's two characters that that you have the option of controlling.
Right.
People assumed it was multiplayer, and then it wasn't. And I think that generated some backlash.
Yeah. I mean, we're still talking about we're talking about games that were brought up in an era where couch co-op was still the norm, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's
it
what
wasn't.
you did.
It was, I remember back in those days. I played this game quite a bit in co-op, or Secret of Mana. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I played Secret of Mana quite a bit in co-op.
Yeah.
With having friends over or something, and I had a lot of fun with it. And I'm not sure when I first played Secret of Evermore if I knew it was a one-player game or not, and I don't know if that factored into my opinion on the game at all. But I can't really recall. But I think that could very well be a reason why some people sort of dismiss this game, and the game got some backlash. It's because they expected it to have multiplayer and it didn't.
Yeah. Well, just one more thing I wanted to talk about was the ending of the game. Kind of like the thoughts on the ending. I know the boss battle at the end wasn't, it was great, as we expected it to be, sort of anticlimactic. But the ending to me was very nice. I really liked the ending, and the credit sequence and everything. Going back, I think I would have maybe liked to have seen what happened to more of the other Podunk residents. That we didn't get as much of that at the end, though we did get the professor at the end, and we got to see the robot Carltron, and which was kind of neat. Him rubbing his hands together at the end. Mischievous, and then it says the end, and it's got the big question mark. I thought that was really neat, and I think the game really sets itself up for a sequel. And I hope that's honestly, after playing this game, I really hope that's something that some studio or Square maybe thinks about doing down the road. I don't know how. Maybe it's too late though. I mean, I don't know that this game would be as appealing on a more modern system though. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, surely if they were to make a sequel, it would be almost completely different type of game. I mean, it would. I highly doubt they would make it like a retro style game. It would be this kind of modern. I don't really know how they would go about doing it, but I don't think it would be the same thing that Secret of Evermore was.
Yeah, as goofy and as cheesy as Secret of Evermore was, it just doesn't seem like it would translate into like a more modern, probably more serious game. The games these days seem to be, sort of more serious, like third person, like action shooter type things. Yeah. And I don't know that would, translate well into a new Secret of Evermore game. I feel like it would almost have to be retro style if they were going to do it, but I don't feel like anybody's going to take that lead.
They could make it a first person shooter.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah, true.
I mean, there was Turok where you go around shooting dinosaurs.
True.
So you can go back to Prehistoria and shoot dinosaurs.
Well, do you guys have any other thoughts about the game? Anything that we sort of neglected to mention? I think we covered most of everything pretty well for this game.
No, I just probably say it's, this is a game that is probably overlooked quite a bit. It has its flaws, but it's a good game, and people should check it out.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it to others who are interested in, playing an RPG such as this. I mean, I feel like it's definitely a game that anyone who collects for the Super Nintendo needs to have in their library, and at least needs to pull it off. You need to pull it off the shelf and play it because it's a really fun game. And really glad that we decided to play it this month. So thanks, guys. I appreciate you joining us. I do want to mention this December, it's the holidays are upon us. So as usual, here at RF Generation, we're going to be having a competition. And 2 years ago, we did Streets of Rage. We played Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3 and did a high score competition for those. And then last year, we did a shmup competition, which was a lot of fun. And this December, we decided to do something similar, have a competition. Got a really cool trophy that we'll be handing out. And we decided to go with the genre or the theme of run and gun. And pick some kind of cool games. We're kind of combining the retro and the modern sides and just kind of putting it all in one. These are kind of games that you can just kind of pick up and put down. Week 1, we're going to be playing Contra on the original Nintendo Entertainment System. Week 2, we're going to be playing Rolling Thunder 2 on the Genesis. And then week 3, we're going to be playing Metal Slug 3, which is on Xbox. It's on several anthologies, PS2, PSP, Wii, right?
Yeah, there's one on the Wii.
And I think it's also downloadable as well on some of, I don't know if it's Xbox Live or...
I'm pretty sure it's on Steam and Xbox Live. It may be on PSN. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But, I hope anyone listening to this, even if you're not a member at RF Generation, please come over, check out our forums, play with us in this playthrough. We've got a really kind of cool trophy that I've actually crafted for the run and gun. It should be a lot of fun. We just kind of enjoy hanging out. It's a fun time of year. Just come over, sign up for a free account at RF Generation, join the forums, and join the playthrough. I think you'll have a good time, and you'll get to meet a lot of great people on our site. So anyway, all right. Well, that wraps it up for our retro November playcast for Secret of Evermore. Thanks for joining us, guys. I really appreciate it.
So, Stephen, believe it or not, once upon a time, I was a Vita hater.
Whoa, I would have never thought.
Yeah. So I am a self-proclaimed Sony fanboy. I'm not a huge fan of the term fanboy, but I I am a Sony guy. As much as I love Nintendo and the Microsoft Xbox platforms, I love them all. But I think the PlayStation 2 is the greatest console of all time, and I've kind of built my collection around the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2. Not the PSP's biggest fan, because I always felt the hardware was a little bit flimsy and it had issues with the hardware itself. But I like my PSP and I play it quite frequently. When the Vita came around, I, like most people, had a real problem with the proprietary memory card, which is still to this day just the main concern for potential Vita owners, is that they require these memory cards that can cost upwards of $100 for a 32 gig card, which is obscene for memory in this day and age. So, as much as I loved Sony, when the Vita came out, I was really turned off by it. However, I had a coworker who had a Vita, and it had a 32 gig card in it. And just out of the blue, he knew I liked video games, and he said, "You know, I want to get rid of this thing. Do you want to take it off my hands for $150?" I said, "Sure. Like, why not?" Like, that just totally, I mean, the system was retailing for $200 at the time, and it had the card in it. So that totally negated the problem with the memory card. So lo and behold, I had a Vita, and I already had my PlayStation Plus subscription at the time. So I became a Vita owner. And one of the games that came out early on when the PlayStation Plus program was introduced was a title that we're going to be talking about in this segment, which is Gravity Rush. This is a game that is known still to this day as kind of the crown jewel of the Vita's library. It's the killer app, the system seller, if you will. And it's the game that is kind of synonymous with the Vita. It goes hand in hand. It was one of the first games that I played to completion when I got my Vita. My original save file, when I was looking at it, was from early 2013. And the first time I played the game, I loved it, but I had some really harsh frustrations with it, which we can discuss when we get into the gameplay and stuff. But now we can talk about it together, because I'm revisiting it, and this is your first time playing it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I got my Vita like 3 years ago. A story very similar to yours, actually. I bought it off a friend for much cheaper than it was retailing it for, and that's actually what made me sign up for a PlayStation Plus membership, were the free Vita games. So I just instantly had these Vita games on hand, and so this was like 3 years ago, and this game's been in my digital library, and I just now finally got around to playing it. So it was yeah, this is a game that's it's unique. You know, I don't feel like there's quite an experience like this on other systems, and so I think saying it's the killer app for the Vita is fitting. I mean, of course, Vita has like Uncharted, but of course you can play Uncharted games on PS3, and you know there's Persona 4, but you can play it on PS2, and you know there's you can't really, there's nothing else quite like Gravity Rush anywhere else, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny you mention the Uncharted game, Uncharted Golden Abyss, and Persona 4 Golden, because those are probably my other two favorite games on the Vita. And I even have a kind of a love-hate relationship with the modern Naughty Dog games, the Uncharted games and The Last of Us. But that Uncharted game is far and away my favorite Uncharted game. The reason being, there's not too much combat. It's more like peppered in throughout the game, and it's not just endless Gears of War cover shooting. And I actually kind of really like that game for that reason. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, the Gravity Rush really uses the Vita's technology, which is one of the things. Just to get back to the hardware itself, the Vita kind of, in addition to the memory card, the Vita was lacking software in the beginning, and it was really the three titles that we just mentioned that kind of were saddled with holding up the Vita, and it just wasn't enough. As history has shown, Nintendo has conquered the market on handhelds, and the Vita just recently is being added to the graveyard of handhelds that have tried to compete with the Nintendo Game Boy and DS systems. So as impressive as the technology is, with it's a really rugged piece of hardware compared to the PSP. It's very solid. It has dual thumbsticks. It's still the only handheld system that has dual thumbsticks if you don't count the extra thumbstick that you can buy for the 3DS. As of now, just far superior like graphical and processing capabilities versus any other handheld out there. But sadly, I mean, like I said, the software just wasn't there, and the competition was too harsh. So I wanted to just throw in about the Vita a little bit, because I kind of joked that in picking this game, I almost guaranteed zero participation because nobody likes the Vita. But I was proven kind of wrong by that, because we had a few participants in the thread. Myself, you, Steven, Link41 has played the game in the past, and he signed up initially, then said that he had lent the game out. But I wanted to include him and just give him a shout out, because he is like a fellow Vita booster on rfgeneration.com. So I always see him in the Gaming Diary thread playing Vita games, so that's kind of cool. And then we got a user with a almost not safe for work username, which is the Vita douche, who's a new user on the thread or on the site, and he chimed in the thread that he was playing the game. So welcome aboard. And we also had our old friend Jamie, known as Tech Wizard on the forum, join in, and he has chimed in on the thread and also PM'd me that he's really enjoying the game, so that was kind of cool. Hi, Jamie. Glad to have you aboard. So, Gravity Rush was a game that was actually initially planned to be a PS3 game, which is kind of interesting to me, but they shifted development to the Vita, and the game was directed by Keiichiro Toyama and written by Naoko Sato, who worked on the original Silent Hill game and the Siren series, which is kind of cool to me. And Steven, I'm going to kind of pick your brain here, because these are some of the important survival horror titles and franchises out there. What do you think about that? I mean, Toyama he hasn't directed a ton of games, and they're basically the original Silent Hill, the Siren series, and the Gravity Rush games.
Yeah, it's a pretty big departure from those first two series. Of course, I'm a big survival horror fan myself, so I've definitely played the original Silent Hill games. And Siren, I haven't played the original Siren, but I played the digital PS3 game that came out years ago. Yeah, I was surprised when I read that in your notes, because I would have never guessed. They seem like such very different games, like just in terms of the gameplay itself and the tone of the games. Gravity Rush is it's kind of a lighthearted experience. It's not really a lot of horror or those kind of aspects in it.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to go from that and to also have. I love when a developer can shift gears like that and be successful. And at least in my opinion, with the original Silent Hill being one of the all-time classic survival horror games, and now Gravity Rush being, a pretty well-regarded, open world superhero action game with RPG elements. So It's really cool. So let's get into the story. And we were kind of discussing off the air before we started recording that the story, you can give a basic framework for it, but it gets really convoluted as it goes along. It's like Metal Gear Solid levels of what the hell's going on here. And you start the game as Kat, who is your main character, the playable character for the entire game. And in the beginning of the game, she wakes up and doesn't realize where she is and follows this cat that she names Dusty. And just within the first 10 minutes of the game, you discover your powers, which are the powers to manipulate gravity and fly. And as the game goes on, you're helping citizens of the city, and you're rebuilding the city, and it just goes from there, where you're traveling through interdimensional rifts and you're meeting gods and creators of the universes, and then it turns into kind of a totalitarian, almost Nazi-ish government thing at the end. And then as the credits roll, you get these twists and, openings for a sequel for sure. But man, if somebody asked me, like, condense the story in a couple sentences, I just couldn't. Like, I'm sorry. And as I told you off the air, I've looked for, like, quickie explanations of this, and I'm just gonna claim dumb on this one. I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add, but
no, I mean, it's not always a good sign when even the characters in the game don't seem to know what's going on.
Yeah,
I mean, that's like
right.
you said, Kat, she just wakes up and she doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know who she is, where she is, how or why she has these powers. So of course we don't know either. And you mentioned, like, all of a sudden the town goes to, like, this totalitarian government thing, and that just happens out of nowhere. Like, you're in this, like, you're sort of underneath the main city, and it's, I don't know, I can't even explain it. It's just you're down there for a little while, but you find out you've been down there for like a year for some reason, even though she says she feels like it's only been a few days, and everything's changed up on the surface. And yeah, convoluted is a pretty good word to describe it. I couldn't really tell you what's going on.
Right. And then, like you said, the whole, like, totalitarian thing just all of a sudden happens, and these characters like Mayor Danica, who is not mentioned, or if he is, it's so subtly that it doesn't matter, that he's all of a sudden, like, main bad guy within, like, the last 2 story missions.
Yeah.
So it's very strange, but that, at least for me, and this is my second time playing through the game, and it still doesn't, like, detract from the experience. I just kind of rolled with it, much like a Metal Gear Solid game. Even though I've spoken on the air about how I do kind of have a grip on the Metal Gear Solid lore, but not really. But with this game, I just totally don't, like, not even close.
Yeah, that's kind of describes how I played it too. I just sort of went along with it, and I think I've mentioned before that I do that a lot with games. That I'm not one to sort of try to point out all the plot holes and look for all that stuff, and I just sort of take a story for what it is and just roll with it. So that's kind of what I had to do here.
Yeah. All right. So to the listeners, sorry about that. If you want to roast us for it on the forum, by all means, or help us out with it. Let us know what the heck's going on in this game, story wise. But let's roll into the presentation here. Now this is one of the game's strengths, is how the game looks, sounds, and, like, the characters designs and everything. So let's just start off. This is a cell shaded game, and Toyama chose the cell shaded game to kind of differentiate from the open world games in the West, which typically go for a more realistic feel. And as I see, and as many of us see that are fans of cell shading, it tends to give the game kind of a timeless look. If we look at games like The Wind Waker, for example, cell shaded games age very well, or at least they tend to. And in this game, it is kind of cartoony, but it's not as far cartoony on the spectrum as Wind Waker. It kind of blends a certain realism, especially in the city environments and the architecture, where the character models kind of look more cartoony. But other than the fact that some of the environments were a little muted in color, a lot of the other environments were pretty colorful. I felt the game in general could have been more colorful, but having said that, I really felt that the cel-shaded look of the game was great. It looks really good. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it does look really good, and I'm really not the biggest fan of cel-shaded graphics, although I will agree that they do tend to age better than when a developer goes for more realism, and then 10 years later it doesn't look so good anymore. I will agree with what you said about the color palette being kind of muted. There were some places where everything just looked red. It was like it was almost like you were looking at it in infrared or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were other areas. I think of the like the entertainment district area. It was like neon lights, and it was pretty cool to look at. But yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of cel shaded graphics, but it didn't detract from the experience at all for me. I do think it looked really good.
Cool, man. And another big aspect of what I really love about this game is the music. And our composer for this game was Kohei Tanaka, who works way more in anime than he does in video games. But he did work on Alundra, Resonance of Fate, and the Sakura Wars games. So those are some kind of like niche, not the biggest blockbuster titles in the world, but games that are probably familiar to a lot of our listeners. But the music in this game, it's not the best in the world, but I think it's mentioned a lot on this podcast that the music, or at least I'll speak for myself, where you'll ask me about the music and I'll say, it was okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't really notice it. The music in this game, I think, is just a step above that, where a lot of it was, I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, didn't notice it, but some of it I really liked. And you mentioned the colorful environment of the red light district area kind of place. Mm-hmm. And the music in that area is like this bouncy, jazzy, like really upbeat, fun music. That was by far my favorite music in the game. But Tanaka, his work in this game was just very appropriate throughout the whole game. You have intense music during battles and symphonic, breezy kind of nice music, which is good for flying around. I don't know if you have any other like comments to add about the music.
No, I pretty much agree with what you said. It's pretty good. Even the that entertainment district, you mentioned it was like kind of upbeat and jazzy, and I tend to not really like that style of music very much, but I actually liked it in this game. I don't know what it was. Maybe it just because it fit the setting so well. But yeah, the music during the fights, like you said, they were intense, and overall it was pretty good.
Cool. And we also have, instead of like there's like a handful of actual cinematic cutscenes, but a lot of the pre-mission and in between mission cutscenes are actually a comic book style, where you scroll through panels and read speech blurbs. But there's a cool little gimmick that when you're looking at the comic book things, you can tilt the Vita and it gives it kind of a perspective shift. It's not really anything special, but it's kind of neat.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and just to comment about like the comic book cutscenes kind of tie into the actual character models themselves, because like I said, where the environments are kind of realistic environments with a cell shade over them, the character models are very comic booky or cartoony. And I actually noticed, because I was kind of, I don't want to dig too deep into this on the air, but I was thinking about Kat from the perspective of, the the hot topic of strong female protagonists in video games, and how she fits into that mold. And I thought, well, how's her costume look? Is she over sexualized? Is she like too sultry? Is it impractical? But I actually realized that her costume is basically Wonder Woman's costume as far as coverage, and it's just a color swap on Wonder Woman's costume. Instead of being red, white, and blue, it's black and gold. And I think it looks really cool. And there are some, and again, I don't want to delve too much into the political stuff about, you know, female characters in video games. There is some fan service with Kat in a lot of the cutscenes. She's in a bath towel, like in a few of them. But for the most part, I think she and Raven have very cool, dignified, you know, sexy but not too sexualized character models and costumes. And I don't want to get too much further into it than that, but I don't know if you, Stephen, have any comment on the look of the characters.
I will say the costumes, they were kind of revealing in a way, but I felt like Kat as a character seemed kind of young and innocent in a way, and kind of naive and things like that. So I didn't really, it's almost like I didn't really feel like she was really sexualized. It's kind of, might sound a little contradictory, but yeah, I mean, the costume, it kind of, yeah, well, it kind of was revealing, but I don't know. It just, I think her character sort of downplayed that a lot.
Yeah, I think I get what you're maybe trying to say is that they walked a line successfully that a lot of developers fall to either one side of being, you know, too sexy or too moe or naive and kind of gross. You know, we see that a lot in games. It's a hot topic right now politically in video games, but I think they really walked a line nicely here without falling off the edge to either direction.
Yeah, I thought it was there was one part where she's talking to this, I believe, like an older woman in the game, and she says something about the way Kat's dressed, and you know, the little there's in the little speech bubbles, if it's in parentheses, that'll be like what Kat's thinking, and in those parentheses, she said something like, "What's wrong with the way I'm dressed?" You know,
right,
so.
right. Yeah, that was funny. So yeah, now we can get into the real meat of this discussion, which is going to be the actual gameplay, the combat, all the good stuff in this game. So the game, if our listeners have played, say, Infamous or Prototype or any of those open world superhero games that kind of were kicked off with a game called Spider-Man 2, which a lot of people know was one of the first of the open world superhero games as we know them. And the director of this game said he was influenced a lot by the game Crackdown, which I know a lot of forum users on RF Generation are a fan of that game. So what we have here is a superhero game where you're in an open world environment and you activate missions much in the way you would in any open world game like Grand Theft Auto. You find an icon on your map and go to it and start a mission, and that's how you go through the main story. There are 20 main story missions, or 21, I forget exactly, but you got your main story missions, and then you have side missions, and the side missions are contextually presented as public service projects, which I thought was kind of cool. Like every challenge mission or side mission is you go to a place and you get the power plant running by donating some of your gems. And I love the animation where she opens the hatch and throws the gems in, and then she slams it shut and slaps it. And I don't know why, but I love when she just slaps it like, there you go, get that going. So you're doing things around the city. The whole game is based around Kat wants to help the people in the city. So I thought it was kind of cool that in order to open the challenge maps and the side missions, you're activating an elevator or building a bridge or something, but you get this cool little animation to do it.
Did you do any of the challenge maps?
Yeah, I tried. It's funny, the first time I played the game, I didn't. Because a lot of them are keyed into some of the more weird abilities that you have, like the sliding ability when you're doing the sliding races, and you have to use the motion controls, and it's really tricky. But this time, for the purposes of, having a good playthrough and a good podcast, I wanted to try them all. And some of them I liked, some of them I didn't. The races where you're going checkpoint to checkpoint flying around, I didn't really love, but I ended up actually liking the ones where you're sliding around that I said that I didn't like the first time around. So what about you? Did you do those? I know you're going for those gems, and we'll explain what those are in a minute, but were you hitting all those side missions?
I actually didn't do any of them.
No way.
I know. As I'm usually, kind of a completionist and try to do all this stuff, but it was kind of a combination of, I was a little bit pressed for time trying to finish this game. And, I figured a lot of that stuff would be kind of annoying time trial stuff. So I just didn't really want to subject myself to that. But, you mentioned like the sliding mechanic, and that was something I just really couldn't get to work very well, like steering it. So I'm kind of glad I didn't, I don't know, maybe I'd feel different if I actually did the challenge map, but I don't know. It might be something I go back and in the next few days and maybe mess around with it some, but I actually didn't do any of that. So
yeah, there are three kinds. One of them is the sliding race, which is checkpoint to checkpoint. Another one's the gravity checkpoint to checkpoint time trial, and then there's one that's just a combat thing, which is fight as many Nevi in a certain area in a certain time, and your time extends as you beat enemies. One thing to note is that even though you can win gems by doing the side missions, you can't grind on them. So once you get like first, second, or third place, you get those gems and you can't place again. You have to either do better or you're done with it, or you don't get anything.
So you can't just like find an easy mission and just replay it over and over and get all the gems you want. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So that's it. That's your open world structure. You got story missions and then a bunch of side mission. The side missions are just challenge races and stuff. You also do have something that will show up on your map are conversations, and there are one or two story missions where you have to actually do the conversations to gather information to progress the story, but the conversations are really just kind of superfluous, and just add a little bit of color context to the world. Some of them are neat, but again, with the story being what it is, you're a lot of times just left kind of wondering how what the person is saying is fitting into the story. Did you get anything out of the conversations, or did you do any of those?
I usually check those out when I saw them. I don't feel like they really added a lot to the story overall, but I thought they were really good for kind of fleshing out the characters, particularly Kat, so you could just kind of get more of an idea of what she thinks about things. And I really enjoyed them from that perspective. Yeah, exactly. But basically all they are, it's just like in an RPG, just having a throwaway conversation with an NPC. That's essentially what they were. So yeah, that's the open world. There's no shops, you don't have vehicles, so there's no upgrade to your vehicles. It's kind of a bare bones-ish open world, but again, it's more of an action superhero game set in an open world. We do have some RPG elements in this game, and that's where the gems come into play. They are scattered all throughout the world. There are different sized gems that are worth different values, and you need to collect these gems to upgrade Kat's powers. Kat on the ground, she has a kick that
basically a kicking attack that she can do on the ground, but she also has her flight abilities, which you'll be doing most of the time, which is a flying kick, which locks onto enemies. And then you have special attacks that you earn by doing key story missions. So the whole point of getting the gems is to upgrade all of these things. And they start with kind of low level caps, but as you progress through the game, the level caps will be increased. When Kat says, like, my powers are increasing, then you can go in and load up some more of those powers to higher levels. So as usual, Stephen, I think you mentioned on the forum that you had a lot of fun searching for these gems, and I think the gem hunt in this game was done pretty well. It reminded me a lot of Infamous and finding those blue thingies everywhere to upgrade the powers in that game.
Yeah,
but
I think I mentioned on the forum that hunting down the gems it reminded me of games like Infamous and Crackdown, which it's funny that you mentioned that the creator of this game was inspired by Crackdown. So I think,
and specifically for the power-ups and you know what I mean? So it is very much like that.
I mean, I spent most of my time in Crackdown just exploring the open world, looking for these orbs, is what they were called in Crackdown. But it's very similar in Gravity Rush. And yeah, every time I unlocked a new area of the city that I could explore, I would just spend 10, 15, 20 minutes, I don't know how long, just flying around looking for gems. And I remember there was I think I was in a boss fight towards the end of the game, and instead of fighting the boss, I was going and collecting these gems that I was seeing.
Yeah, I did that a few times myself, especially when you can see off in the distance the big ones, which are worth like 20 or 25 or whatever it is. And it's like, oh, I got to go get those, especially when there's like a bunch of them together. It's like, oh man, the mother load. So you got to like fly.
I think I was flying so far, I eventually flew out of the zone for the boss fight, and it had to put me back in the...
Yeah, it'll redirect you, and it'll say, oh, no, I have to fight this guy. Yeah. But yeah, that's that. So you have that collect-a-thon aspect in this game, and like I said, it's pretty well done. Sometimes this kind of thing can be annoying in games, like, oh man, I got to find all these things. Like if it's someone like you, Steven, you like doing it. Me, I can go either way. If it's well done, I'm into it, and if it's not, it feels like a chore. But I think for this game, it works well for a couple of reasons, and one is because they're pretty well placed, well designed. Some of them are hidden, some of them are right out in the open. You'll run into a nice little cluster every once in a while. But the other thing is the game can be challenging, but it's not a very hard game. So it's not like you feel, at least for me, I didn't feel like I had to hunt down gems. Like I didn't have to grind on hunting gems to upgrade Cat to be able to do certain things. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I did the upgrades, but I guess I never felt like, I guess maybe incrementally, I never felt like they were doing a big difference. I guess collectively, they probably are, as far as like upgrading her attack power and things like that. Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned on the forums how we would like kind of exploit the little health level up thing, where if you were low on health, you could level up your max health, and you all of a sudden would be back at full health again.
Yeah.
So that was
very helpful.
That was something I used quite a bit, but and I was upgrading one of the like special abilities you get, and I don't know, I just kind of never really felt like it was doing any more damage anytime I upgraded, but I mean surely it had to be, but it just didn't really kind of seem like it.
Yeah, a lot of that is true, that the feedback for upgrading your powers is not as pronounced as maybe it could have been. For example, when you upgrade the homing kick, it says that your power or the homing ability will get better, which is fine. I'm fine with that being kind of invisible, but I never felt like I homed in better at any time throughout the game. I always felt like, and I mentioned on the forum, I thought the homing power was a little bit lacking. And I don't feel like it ever got better, no matter how much I upgrade the gravity kick. So
yeah, I always as far as like the homing feature, it was kind of frustrating in that you would try to target the cursor over an enemy, and it's supposed to do this kind of auto lock-on thing, but often you would still just sort of whiff right past them. And I really wish this game had like a hard lock-on feature where you could just press a button and lock onto an enemy, and I think it would have helped the combat quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely, and that's a good way to segue into the combat in general, which is a lot of people, including me, that's the biggest problem with the game is the combat. Now it's not bad, but what you're fighting are these monsters called Nevi, and they all have this obvious weak point, which is like this big red glass bulb somewhere on their body. Some of them have multiple ones of those, and you have to aim for those. That's the only way you can hurt or kill pretty much every enemy in the game. And some of the enemies, they can get very, very frustrating because a lot of the times the only thing you can use is the gravity kick. And I always ran into the problem, especially during my first playthrough a couple of years ago, where I couldn't hit anything because I would just be flying through the air with the kick and they would just kind of move out of the way right at the last second. Yeah. And you'd end up kind of hooking around them as you continue to try to home in and seek them. It's weird and it's hard to explain until you actually do it, but it can be very frustrating.
I would get frustrated with that as well, and I felt like the just regular battles in the game where you're fighting just the regular Nevi enemies were actually more difficult most times than the boss fights, because there were quite a group of them, and you're trying to hit them, but they keep moving out of the way and they're throwing projectiles at you, and it was definitely frustrating at times.
Yeah, and another like kind of frustration for some people is that the dodge mechanic is mapped to swiping the front screen, which some people really don't like. I felt like I kind of got the hang of it early on, and I even posted on the forum that I stupidly didn't even realize you could do it while you were in midair until like halfway through the game. But that made the game a hell of a lot easier once I realized that, because I was kind of like slow dodging by flying out of the way of projectiles, for example. But you can just swipe and she'll dodge midair.
Yeah, I didn't make much use of the swiping to dodge, actually. I didn't even try to dodge much in general. I would just try to run straight through everything, and which I took a lot of damage, and I would, of course there are like green health gems scattered around that you can use to get your health back, and there's a little health level up exploit we were talking about. Right. Even, with my reckless way of playing the game, I don't think I even died or got a game over once in this game. I may be wrong. I may have maybe got one early on, but so it's not a particularly difficult game. But yeah, I probably should have taken the time to get used to the dodge mechanic. But I don't really like things that make use of motion controls or touch controls. So if I don't necessarily have to use it, I probably won't.
Yeah, same here, and that brings up a good point as far as the controls in general and the kind of, you can say gimmick if you want to, of when you're in flight. So you go into flight by hitting the R shoulder button, and that kind of suspends you in midair, and you can kind of propel Cat in the direction you're facing by hitting the R button again. And theoretically, you should be able to tilt the Vita to move the camera and kind of aim Cat in the direction you want her to go. But I found myself just using the right stick to do that most of the time.
Yeah, same here. And sometimes it felt like it worked, and sometimes it seemed like it didn't. So I'm not really sure what the case was with that. But as far as like trying to move the Vita itself, I wasn't doing that at all.
Yeah, and speaking of the controls and the physics of the game, there's one thing that kind of bothered me throughout the whole game, and I want to just throw it out here, that when Cat is flying, and you actually will gain a power pretty early in the game that gives you like super speed flight, where if you're flying, you can hold X and she'll go even faster. You can hit the L trigger to just turn off your gravity powers and go into a free fall. But if you're traveling, if you're flying, gravity, you're using your gravity power and flying, even at the fastest speed. If you just hit left, you lose all your momentum and just go into a free fall, which doesn't make sense, because if Kat is just flying, she should have the momentum of the flight that she was in. Even if you stopped propelling yourself, you would keep going a distance in the direction you were going. So just from a scientific standpoint, I always had a problem with that, where you just kind of stop and then start falling when you turn off the gravity power. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Like, if I was trying to like land on a platform, I would, be flying in that direction. And I would usually try to just turn off the gravity powers just so I would, and time it right so I would land on it, but it would never work. And it's probably because of the sort of wonky physics there. But
Right. But, and as far as flying, just getting back to the character models and the animations, I really love the animation that they use for Kat while she's flying. She just has this she's not flailing, but her body just looks relaxed, and she's kind of she's not flying like Superman with her arms out.
yeah.
You know what I mean? She's just floating, and her body is rotating, and her arms and legs are just kind of sprawling about. It's really cool and beautiful. Like I love the choices that they made with those animations. It looks so cool, and it makes me feel like that's kind of how it would be if you could fly. If you weren't like flapping your arms or had your hands in front of you like Superman, that's more like what it would be like. So I just wanted to touch on that. I love those animations.
Yeah, I'm glad they went with that, because it probably would have looked really silly if she was flying like Superman or something. But yeah, it looked really cool what they did with that.
Yeah. So getting back to the combat, so we had our troubles with the homing kick and some of the dodging mechanics, but one thing that makes the game easier are the special attacks, which are part of the upgrade system. You can upgrade them and make them better as you go along if you have the right amount of gems. Now, I only got... Are there 3? I forgot to look this up, because I think there is one that I didn't get, or there's only 3, and I'm not sure.
To my knowledge, there's only 3.
Okay, if that's true, then that's fine. You get these during, again, key story missions, usually the ones that have boss battles at the end. The first one is the drill kick, which is this prolonged kick where Kat just kind of spins around like a drill. And it does, if you hit the right spot, it can really deplete the enemy's health very quickly. Yeah. And in certain instances can be a very useful attack.
Yeah, I think that's the one I use the most.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I especially on boss fights. Yeah, it was very helpful.
Yeah, if you get it right, you could take away almost half of an enemy's health by using that correctly. The other one is the Gravity Typhoon, which is where she unleashes this like kind of barrage of boulders that she launches from wherever you're looking. And I found this one to be really good for groups of enemies, where you can kind of pick off a bunch of enemies at once from a distance. I like this one a lot. Did you use that at all?
I never used this one. I don't even think I ever saw it. I mean, I know I had it, but I never used this one.
Oh wow, yeah, it can be, and the stones or whatever they are that she's shooting tend to hit their mark. Like they're better at homing than your homing kick is. Like they'll hit whatever you throw them at. So, the fourth one is, I believe it's called the black hole or the gravity black hole or something
like that.
And that one just creates a field around Kat that does damage to the enemies that are near her. And I found this one to be the least useful for the most part, because it only really works if you're on the ground, because it works on a flat plane and creates a circle around Kat, basically. So when you're in the air, at least in my opinion, it doesn't work that great because you have to be close to enemies and they have to be on that plane that's kind of a orbit around Cat. So I found it really good for when you're just getting ambushed by groups on the ground, which is not very often in this game.
Yeah, I used this one kind of late in the game for some of the groups that were on the ground. They were particularly when there were larger enemies that had like multiple weak spots that you had to take out. So it seemed like a good way to sort of hit all those weak points and to hit all these enemies at once. And I found it pretty effective for those situations. But this was like very late in the game that I started using it. So I mean, perhaps the other one you mentioned might have been better for those situations. But as far as like taking out groups of enemies, this was kind of like my go-to skill late in the game. Yeah, it's like all the skills are viable skills. None of them are useless.
Right. So yeah, that's kind of what combat is. And another thing is the enemy, the Nevi are the only enemies in the game with the exception of the final boss of the game, which is also kind of fueled by a Nevi and ends up having Nevi weak points at the end. But they did a pretty good job, I think, with having variation in the types of Nevi. So it's basically like a shadowy, like black kind of creature with, like I said, a big red glass orb somewhere on his body that you have to hit. And there were ones that start off, they're just little crawly things that crawl around on the ground. And then there's more imaginative ones as the game goes on, like one that has the orb is like on its butt, but it'll lean over and have like a spear in front of it and charge at you, and you have to find a way to get behind it. But as the game goes on, they get more and more complex, like those big guys, like you were saying, with the multiple orbs on their back, but they have this like cool fist thing that punches out at you and comes flying at you. But also all the boss battles are just variations of the Nevi. And I think I forget if you PM'd me or put it on the forum that you had a little bit of trouble with the boss battle during the story mission that had the character of Echo, which is somebody that you just had to save.
I think I did have a couple close calls during that fight. I actually don't remember that fight very well, but I kind of remember that mission. I think that might have been the first point in the game, the first fight where I kind of had to try to play a little more safe. Yeah, I would have to back off and hunt down some of those green health gems, but I guess I had a little trouble with that one, but I don't remember too well.
Yeah, I think the boss battles, because they are just another variation of a Nevi, like a super Nevi, if you will, they tend to be a little bit less memorable than any other game that has more fleshed out boss battles. But that's not to say they're bad. And that particular mission with Echo, you're fighting a Nevi that's kind of running around this university environment. So you have to go in. He is going in between the buildings, and you have to find a way to get to him before he kills her. I forget.
Yeah, I remember now. It's kind of like he's sort of like holding Echo or something, and you have to be careful not to hit her.
Right.
Which is a little bit of a pain because you have to be kind of careful about that. But yeah.
And then one of the things, like later on, the one that's actually, there's one that has a name when you're saving the kids. I think it's called Nucci or something.
Yeah.
That one, that was probably my least favorite because I found myself just kind of waiting for my special attack to recharge, which I guess we forgot to mention. When you do those special attacks, you have one use of it, and then it just has a long cooldown period before you can use it again. I think it's like minutes. It's probably like 2 minutes or something. So sometimes with these bosses, they were so dangerous as far as like projectiles or something that it was hard to get near them to attack them. So I would just kind of wait it out until my special attack recharged and then go in for another couple of hits and then just keep doing that.
Yeah, and this fight was kind of frustrating because this boss is sort of like this flying snake or almost like a centipede kind of thing, and so he's like flying around and he's moving, and there's like several. I think at the beginning there's just one gem, but later on there's like several along his back, and they can be kind of tough to hit because we talked about the homing kick doesn't always work as well as we would like it to, and it's a moving target, so it can be frustrating when you keep trying to kick him and you just go right past them, and that was a little frustrating.
So I actually did like the final boss though, because that's kind of a contrast to it's a contrast A, to just being variations of the Nevi, and B, for once in a modern game, it's not just a quick time event. And I think it's actually worth noting that you do this like finisher at the end of every boss where you have to touch the screen, which is actually, I wouldn't even consider it a quick time event, but if you could call it that, it's a better use of that kind of mechanic to do that, because you actually had a fight, which was like in-game combat, and then when you get the health low enough, you do this not so quick time event kind of thing where you have to touch the screen, and that sets off the animation of Cat like destroying the enemy. So the final boss is called the Anemone, is it? Yeah. And that is a creation of the totalitarian government, and it's basically this it's like the Death Star. It's like a mini Death Star that is on the surface created to destroy the Nevi. But again, in this convoluted story, I think what's happening is that the government is actually going to use the Nevi to kind of enslave or kill the people or whatever. So go ahead.
Oh yeah, they say they created this machine to they say it's supposed to wipe out the Nevi, but apparently it's being powered by the Nevi. They were trying to harness the powers of the Nevi which seems like a bad idea to me, but
right.
But yeah, there was some talk at the end where they're saying they're gonna have to like self-destruct this thing, and they're like, it's gonna kill all the people underneath the town, and they're like, well, this is part of our population decreasing plan or something, and I mean, it was really weird. I wasn't really sure what they were talking about, but apparently their plan was to like kill all these people or something.
Again,
not really explained very well.
Right, but the final boss battle itself is pretty good. Like, it's a 3-stage battle, and it's actually the only battle that I'm pretty sure it's the only battle in the game that has a checkpoint in it, and it's after the second stage of the boss. So it's pretty cool, and contextually, story-wise, it fits in where the other characters in the game help you with the boss battle. You have to lure the thing towards Raven and then towards this other character whose name I forget, who's another like kind of cool superhero-ish person who is working for the government, who I wish got a little bit more fleshed out, but she was introduced with that government subplot like right at the end of the game, so we don't get a chance to get to know her, to the point where I forgot her name even. But she helps you, and then the final part of the battle is all the Nevi weak points come out and you have to destroy them, and then you do it and then roll credits. Did you enjoy the final boss battle? Like, how did you feel about that, and compared to the other boss battles in the game?
Yeah, I was actually, the game as a whole, I felt like was starting to kind of drag on and get kind of tedious for me towards the end, but those last 2 chapters, which were just the final 2 boss fights, I actually enjoyed quite a bit. And I guess the boss fight before the final boss is that other character who I believe was Unica.
Yes.
She's sort of like this flying girl with a jetpack and this sort of spear-like arm attachment, which can apparently morph into like this Mega Man type blaster thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, she helps you with that final boss fight, and Raven, who is another character you see all throughout the game, and it kind of starts out. I don't remember, to be honest, but I did enjoy those fights. You have to hit the weak points, and then I think at the end it starts spinning around and you can't actually touch it. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's when
that's
you
where you
have
have
to
to.
lure it over to the other characters, and they'll sort of do that little power attack, and that weakens it for a little bit, and you have a chance to hit the weak spots, and then I think you do that sort of quick time thing, which I don't even think I would really call it a quick time event. It's just like you said, you just tap the enemy on the screen, and but yeah, that's pretty much it. And I thought it was an enjoyable boss fight.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it was a great, like, kind of satisfying way to conclude the game from at least a gameplay perspective. Again, thank God it's just not a quick time event or something really lame or some kind of letdown. It was a classic, like, fully fleshed out 3-stage boss battle, and that was really welcome for this game. So that about wraps up the discussion of the actual gameplay, music, graphics, combat, unless you have anything else to add.
I think I might just want to mention the camera really quick, because when you're shifting shifting gravity all over the place and the perspective's changing, it can get really disorienting. And I kind of wish games that do things like this would just kind of leave the camera like in like the right perspective instead of flipping it around with the character, because it gets really confusing. Maybe just change the position of the character model so you know like which way their gravity is applying to them. But I don't know, it got really disorienting at times when because you're shifting gravity and you don't know which way is up and which way is down, and it's just it gets really confusing.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And having said that, I think they did a pretty good job. The camera only went like wonky or crazy for me a couple times. Well, more than a couple, maybe a dozen times throughout my entire playthrough. But I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think it's important to note that, like, if you're a person who has motion sickness from games, you might want to stay away from this one. I would kind of compare it to maybe Mario Galaxy. It's kind of the same kind of thing where the perspective shifts constantly and you're running underneath and sideways and every direction, and you can get flipped upside down in a moment's notice. So if you tend to have motion sickness, you might want to research this game and maybe watch some footage first before you purchase and try to play it. But for everyone else, I give this game a wholehearted, strong recommendation. It's one of the best games on the Vita. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I mentioned on the forum the first time I played it, I liked it, but the frustrations with the combat really got to me the first time I played it. This time I had a much more enjoyable experience. I think I learned some things. I learned some tricks. I used the dodge mechanic more, as we spoke about. I really love Kat. I found her to be a very relatable character, as she was, I think designed to be. I think they really nailed her, like, girl next door kind of persona. Again, without being too sultry and sexy, she was still strong and attractive, and I just, great character. I love her, and the gameplay itself goes really well with the aesthetic of the world and everything, and I just think it's a overall very cohesive experience. The whole package comes together, with the exception of the overly convoluted story, which we keep hammering on. If you can get past that, you've got a really fun experience ahead of you. I don't know how you.
Yeah,
in general.
I think I mentioned that this was a game that, I mean, I of course I've had it ever since I've had the Vita, because I have got it through PlayStation Plus, but I never checked it out after all this time, because I kind of never thought it looked all that appealing. I mean, I didn't think it looked bad or anything, just not like something I particularly wanted to check out. But as I played it, I really started to enjoy it, and I feel like it kind of drug on a little bit in the middle, like particularly around the point where you're kind of underneath the city and you're with those kids and everything, and you're just kind of down there for a while, just mostly fighting that big snake-like boss. But yeah, at the end it really came together with some really cool boss fights, and I agree about the character. I thought she was a really cool character. I always like just seeing what she would say, because she was she was kind of funny, and seemed kind of innocent, and like she just a genuinely good person who wanted to help the people of the city, and just trying to do the right thing. And yeah, it all came together really well, and I think I agree with what you said. It's just overall a good package.
Cool. So as we're recording this, there have been announcements made that there is going to be a remastering of the original game next year, which would be 2016, which is going to come out on the PS4 and maybe PS3 if I'm not mistaken, but definitely PS4, because the sequel, Gravity Rush 2, was announced very recently, and I couldn't be more excited for a sequel to a game. This is I posted on Twitter that this might be the one. This might be the game that sells me on getting a new console, which would be the PS4, because I still haven't gotten into the 8th generation at this point, and I'm just waiting for something that's going to make me want a PS4. But I actually watched a trailer for Gravity Rush 2, and it does look a lot like the first game. Like it's going to be a sequel in the truest sense. It looks like the gameplay looks very similar, but to see it on a big screen, I was just like, my jaw hit the floor. And I think it's one of those things, like when you're playing a handheld console and it's transferred onto the big screen and it looks right and it looks good, I was just like, oh my God, I have to have this. I cannot wait to play this game. It looks amazing. Have you seen this trailer, or have you seen anything about Gravity Rush 2? Or will you have any interest in it now that you've played the first one?
I mean, of course I've heard about it, and its upcoming release. I don't think I've seen any trailers or anything. It's something that will definitely be on my radar when it comes out. I can't promise that I'll play it soon after its release, because I just have so many other games, and it's just something I have to see if I get to it. But I'll definitely be interested, and I'm sure I'll pick it up at some point. But yeah, it's that, and the remaster that's coming out as well. Definitely, I'm sure I'll pick those up at some point.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the remaster, maybe, because I am not the kind of person. Well, I say this every time I play a game, like for the second time, I say, well, I don't usually do this, but now this is like the 4th time I'm saying it. But I don't know if I would go back for a 3rd time, as much as I love this game. But you know what? If it came out for PlayStation Plus again or something cheap, you know what? I think to see this game translated again, to see the first game just translated to a big screen, and take away the motion controls. Like, hopefully they wouldn't do like 6-axis stuff, but it was on the PS4. They don't have that anyway. So I don't know. I think it will look awesome for sure. And, but I can't wait for the second game to come out. I think it's going to be great. So yeah, that I think that wraps up Gravity Rush, man. If you own a PlayStation Vita, you gotta have this game. If you don't own a PlayStation Vita, try to get one cheap, because it's a really cool, advanced piece of hardware. And just because of some missteps that Sony took as far as the memory card and software development, it's a real shame, because this thing is a really solid, well-built machine, and it's a powerhouse technically. It's playing games that almost look like PS3 quality. So that's my 2 cents on the Vita and Gravity Rush in general.
Yeah, I agree about the Vita. It's a great system. I really like the interface and everything of it. It's just a shame that Sony's more or less abandoned it, but it does get a pretty decent Japanese support. So if you're like into RPGs and things like that, there's actually a lot of great games on there. So definitely worth picking one up.
Coming out, especially if you have a PlayStation Plus subscription, you still get 2 Vita games every month. So
Yep.
that's definitely worth it. So this is the point of the show where normally we would talk about the modern game that we're going to play next month, but we have a little bit of an announcement to make at this point in the show, which is that going forward, for December, we're actually going to do our a competition like we normally do, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But starting next year, the playthroughs are going to go from 2 games a month to 1 game a month. And we're not going to do a retro and a modern game anymore. We're just going to do 1 game a month, and it could be either retro or modern. And, the other hosts and I are going to decide what the game is, and we're going to have some kind of consensus on that game. This hopefully will concentrate the player base a little bit and get better participation where people aren't going to have to choose or think about playing 2 games in a month. So this is, I think, a really good send-off to our modern segment. This is our last dedicated modern segment. So I'm really glad it was a game like Gravity Rush, a game that I love, and we could really give it a good send-off with a nice title. And it's been fun. I mean, being on the air with Floyd and with you, Stephen, talking about modern games, I'm happy with the decision that we made to go to 1 game, but I'm going to miss having representation of modern titles in general going forward. But that's where we are right now with the playthroughs and with the podcast. Stephen, I don't know if you have any further commentary on that, but I just wanted to put that on the air for everybody to know.
Yeah, I mean, we had a good run, but I'm looking forward to the changes, especially after this month. It was a little overwhelming because I was playing both games and I was kind of cutting it close on both to get to the recording in time. But yeah, you mentioned we're hoping it might concentrate the player base a little bit more, but we're also we kind of want to bring us hosts back together too, because we've always been so segmented between the 2 different podcasts or the segments of the podcast. So this is kind of a way to unify us. So we hope we get some better discussions as well out of this.
Cool. And so having said that, I'm sure Rich and I'm sure you and Rich talked about this on the other segment when you recorded for Secret of Evermore, but we're doing our run and gun competition in December, which again is going to be the usual competition with rules and prizes and a high score challenge. So check that out. We're going to play Contra, Rolling Thunder 2, and Metal Slug 3. So if you have any or all 3 of those games, come and check us out and join us on the forum. It's going to be really fun. And also it's probably worth mentioning that next month we're going to do our end of the year show that we did last year, and we had a blast with it. So we're going to have kind of look back on 2015 and do some superlatives for some of our favorite games and favorite playthroughs and best moments of the year. So it's going to be a good month for the playthrough itself and for the podcast also. So hope you join us. Check us out on rfgeneration.com. And that brings us to the end of our 20th episode. Thank you very much for listening, and as usual, a very special thank you to everyone who joined the playthroughs. Remember to visit rfgeneration.com to participate in our playthroughs, discuss the games we play, or leave feedback about this podcast. As usual, we have something very special planned for our December playthrough. This year, we're hosting a run-and-gun competition complete with prizes and guaranteed fun for the participants who have what it takes to blast their way through Contra, Rolling Thunder 2, and Metal Slug 3. Check out the December 2015 run-and-gun competition thread on RF Generation for complete details. Thank you as always for listening, and we'll see you next time on the RF Generation PlayCast.